No bullet had ever made Matteo Viscardi lose his appetite. No police raid had ever made his hand shake. No betrayal, no threat, no body left as a warning at his gates had ever stolen the cold calm from his face. But on a grey Monday morning inside the Viscardi estate, every man in that mansion learned a terrifying truth. The most feared mafia boss in the city could survive blood, fire, and enemies without blinking, but he could not survive the thought of Rosa Bellini smiling across a dinner table at another man. The estate sat on a private hill above the old part of the city, hidden behind black iron gates, tall cypress trees, and walls thick enough to make the world outside feel like a rumor. From a distance, it looked beautiful, almost peaceful, with pale stone balconies, wide windows, and gardens trimmed with quiet care. But anyone who worked inside those walls knew better. The Viscardi mansion was not a home in the ordinary sense. It was a fortress with velvet curtains. It was a palace where men carried guns under tailored jackets and spoke softly because loud voices rarely lasted long near Matteo Viscardi. Matteo was not the kind of man people comforted. He was the kind people studied from across a room, trying to guess whether his silence meant mercy or danger. He was 37, broad-shouldered, dark-eyed, and frighteningly controlled, with a face that looked carved from patience and punishment. His suits were always perfect. His voice was always low. His stare could empty a hallway faster than a shouted threat. He had built his power by never giving anyone a clean place to strike. He did not gamble with his emotions. He did not invite pity. He did not ask for warmth. Except, for 4 quiet years, warmth had been finding him anyway. It arrived every morning on the corner of his desk, placed there before he entered his study. A small cup of bitter espresso, just dark enough to bite. A bowl of almond porridge with cinnamon, honey, and a careful pinch of salt. 3 white pills arranged beside a folded napkin. And always, tucked beneath the spoon, a tiny handwritten note in soft rounded letters. Eat before you scare someone. Take the medicine before the medicine gives up on you. You are not made of stone, even if you keep auditioning for the role. The first time Rosa Bellini left one of those notes, Matteo had stared at it for nearly a full minute. Then he had looked at the porridge, looked at the door, and told himself he should fire her for being too familiar. He had not fired her. He had eaten every bite. The next morning the note had said, "Good. I knew you had sense somewhere under all that brooding." Rosa had never known that he kept the notes. She thought he threw them away. She thought he frowned at them, muttered something cold and forgot them before noon. She did not know he had a locked drawer in his desk where dozens of tiny papers were stacked in careful order, each one smoothed flat by hands that had broken men and signed death warrants. She did not know that on nights when business turned ugly and the mansion felt less like stone and more like a tomb, Matteo sometimes opened that drawer and read one note twice. Rosa worked as his private cook, though everyone in the estate knew that title was too small for what she did. She planned his meals around his health, remembered which foods calmed the migraines he refused to admit he had, and made sure the men coming back from long nights found something warm waiting in the kitchen. She was 29, soft-bodied, plus-size, and full of a gentleness that seemed almost dangerous in a place like that. Her cheeks warmed easily. Her laugh came quietly at first, then all at once if someone truly earned it. She wore simple dresses under her apron and tied her dark curls away from her face with ribbons that never stayed neat past lunchtime. Most people outside the estate might have looked at Rosa and seen only a woman who took up too much space in a world that loved making women smaller. Matteo saw something else. He saw the way his men stood straighter when she passed, because she remembered their names and scolded them for skipping breakfast. He saw the way the kitchen became the only room in the mansion where no one pretended to be harder than they were. He saw how she moved through danger without becoming part of it, carrying bowls of soup past armed guards as if kindness itself had clearance. And he hated how much he needed it. That morning began wrong before the sun fully rose. The espresso was there, the porridge was there, the pills were there, but Rosa was not in the kitchen when Matteo passed by, and the note beneath his spoon was folded smaller than usual. He opened it with the same bored expression he wore for business contracts and threats from rivals. "Please eat everything today. I need to ask you something later, and I would rather do it after you have food in you, so you are less impossible." Matteo read the note once, then again. His eyes narrowed. By 7, the mansion knew something had shifted. One guard dropped a keyring in the front hall, and Matteo looked at him so coldly the man went pale. Luca, his underboss and the only person alive who could occasionally risk speaking plainly to him, entered the study with a file and left 3 minutes later looking entertained, which was never a good sign. A maid carrying fresh linens whispered to another that the boss had refused his second coffee. In the kitchen, the younger staff moved carefully, as if the tiles themselves might report them. Rosa noticed, of course. She always noticed too much. She stood near the long marble counter, stirring a pot of chicken broth, while trying to gather the courage she had been losing since dawn. The kitchen was her kingdom, though she never would have called it that. Copper pans hung above her head. Fresh basil sat in clay pots along the window. The ovens breathed out heat. The scent of toasted almonds, garlic, rosemary, and warm bread softened the sharp edges of the house. Here, Rosa could pretend the estate was only a place where people needed feeding. She wiped her hands on her apron when Matteo entered. The room changed around him, the way it always did. Conversations lowered. A knife stopped chopping. The young dishwasher suddenly found a deep interest in the sink. Matteo did not look at anyone else. His gaze went straight to Rosa. "You wanted to ask me something," he said. His voice was calm, but Rosa knew his moods better than most generals knew war maps. There was a tightness at the corner of his mouth. His left hand flexed once at his side. He had eaten the porridge then. Good. That made him slightly less likely to sound like a judgmental statue. "Yes," Rosa said, trying to smile. "I did." Matteo waited. She wished he would sit down. Standing there in his black suit, with his dark hair brushed back, and his eyes fixed on her like she was a secret he intended to solve, he made the simple request feel much larger than it was. "My cousin called last night," Rosa said. "She has been trying to arrange something for me. A dinner." Matteo said nothing. Rosa folded her hands over her apron, suddenly aware of the flour on her fingers, and the softness of her arms, and the way her body always seemed to become louder when she was nervous. With a man. His name is Adrian Vale. He works in antique imports. Or that is what she told me. It is nothing serious. Just dinner. I know evenings are usually when you prefer me here, but I already prepared the sauce for tonight, and Elena knows how long to keep the lamb in the oven. I would only need to leave a little early. The silence that followed was so complete, even the broth seemed to simmer more quietly. Luca, who had appeared in the doorway behind Matteo, lifted one eyebrow and wisely said nothing. Matteo looked at Rosa, as if she had placed a loaded gun on the counter between them. "A dinner," he repeated. Rosa gave a small laugh, though it came out thin. "That is usually what people call eating food at a table. With Adrian Vale. Yes. A man you do not know." "I know his name," Rosa said, then regretted it immediately when Matteo's stare darkened. "And my cousin says he is polite, respectable. She thinks it would be good for me." "Good for you," Matteo said. There was no anger in the words, not openly. That was worse. Matteo's anger was most frightening when it wore a calm face. Rosa lifted her chin. "I have not gone anywhere for myself in a long time. I love my work here. You know I do. But sometimes..." She paused, searching for a safe way to say something that had been hurting for longer than she liked to admit. "Sometimes I feel like I exist only inside these walls, like I am part of the kitchen, or the schedule, or your medicine tray. I wanted one evening where I could feel like an ordinary woman." Something moved through Matteo's eyes then, quick and deep, gone before anyone else could have named it. But Rosa saw it. She had learned him in quiet pieces. She knew the difference between his business silence and his wounded silence. "You are not ordinary," he said. The words should have felt kind. Instead, they made her heart ache. "I know," she said softly. "That is the problem." Matteo's jaw tightened. For one wild second, Rosa thought he might refuse. He had no right to refuse, not really. But men like Matteo rarely needed rights when they had power. He could say the estate needed her. He could say it was unsafe. He could say anything in that final voice of his, and the conversation would be over. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, took out his phone, and glanced at the time. "You may leave at 5. Rosa blinked. "I may?" "Yes." The permission should have relieved her. Instead, his face made her stomach twist. "Thank you," she said carefully. Matteo gave one short nod, turned, and left the kitchen without touching the coffee she had poured for him. Luca lingered half a heartbeat longer, looking at Rosa with something close to sympathy before following his boss into the hall. The moment Matteo was out of sight, the kitchen breathed again. Someone resumed chopping. Elena came to Rosa's side and whispered that green would be a good color for dinner, something soft but not shy. Rosa tried to laugh. She tried to let herself feel excited. She told herself Matteo had been strange only because he disliked changes in routine, because he was a man who treated surprises like ambushes. But far down the hall, behind the closed door of his study, Matteo Viscardi was no longer pretending to be calm. "Find him," he said. Luca stood near the desk, hands clasped in front of him. "Adrian Vale? Everything. Address, business records, bank activity, known associates, travel, family. If he has lied about his favorite wine, I want to know by lunch." Luca's mouth twitched. "This is a security matter, I assume." Matteo looked up slowly. Luca's amusement faded, though not completely. He had served Matteo too long to be foolish, but also too long to be afraid of every shadow. "She asked for a night off, Matteo, not access to your vault. Rosa lives in this house. She works in this house. She is close to my private rooms, my food, my medicine, my staff, and your temper," Luca said, "apparently closer than any of us." Matteo's eyes hardened. "Do the search." Luca held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. "Of course." After he left, Matteo stood alone in the study. The morning light fell across the desk, touching the empty bowl, the espresso cup, and the note Rosa had written. He should have thrown it away. Instead, he picked it up and smoothed the crease with his thumb. He imagined her at dinner in some public room, sitting across from a stranger. He imagined a man making her laugh, without knowing the exact way her eyes softened first. He imagined someone leaning close enough to smell the vanilla and almond that always clung to her skin. The thought moved through Matteo, with a force so sharp he had to set the note down before his hand closed too tightly around it. This was not jealousy, he told himself. Jealousy was reckless, weak, human in ways he had spent years cutting out of himself. This was discipline. This was protection. Rosa was trusted inside a dangerous house, and trust was a door enemies were always trying to open. By noon, Luca returned with a thin file and a colder expression. At first glance, Adrian Vale is clean, he said, placing the folder on Matteo's desk. No arrests, no debts that matter. Antique imports license, 2 years old, pays taxes, smiles in charity photos. The kind of man who helps old ladies reach high shelves. Matteo did not touch the folder. At second glance, he is a ghost wearing good shoes. The room seemed to still. Luca opened the folder. No school records before 2 years ago. No childhood address that holds up. Passport issued under rushed circumstances through a clerk we already know is dirty. His import company receives quiet payments through 3 shells and one of them connects to a warehouse owned by Silvio Marcan. Matteo's face did not change. That was how Luca knew the information had hit exactly where it needed to. Silvio Marcan had been trying to reach inside the Viscardi estate for years. He had tried bribing guards, buying suppliers, planting drivers, turning distant cousins, even pressuring a doctor once. Each attempt had been found and burned before it reached Matteo. But Rosa was different. Rosa did not move through the estate like a guard or a banker or a soldier. She moved through it like comfort. People trusted her because she did not know how to be cruel. Matteo rose from his chair. Luca watched him carefully. We can stop her before she leaves. No. No? If we stop her now, Marcan hides the rest of the plan. Matteo's voice was low, smooth, and almost gentle. We let the door open. Then we see who tries to walk through it. Luca was quiet for a moment. And Rosa? At last, something broke through Matteo's control. Not much. Just a flicker in his eyes, dark and violent and afraid. No one touches her. By 5 that evening, Rosa stood in her small bedroom on the eastern side of the estate, staring at herself in the mirror as if she were looking at a woman she had once known and lost. Elena had been right about the green. The dress was soft and simple, with sleeves that skimmed her arms and a waist that tied gently instead of squeezing. It flowed over her curves instead of hiding them, and for once, Rosa did not immediately reach for a cardigan. She turned slightly, watching the fabric move. A nervous smile touched her mouth. She looked beautiful. The thought startled her so much that tears almost came. Not perfect, not thin, not the kind of woman magazines praised or men at parties chased with easy confidence, but warm, full, alive, like someone who deserved to be seen in candlelight. Downstairs, Matteo watched from the shadowed bend of the main staircase as Rosa crossed the entrance hall. She carried a small purse in both hands. Her curls were pinned back with a green ribbon. There was a little color on her lips, not much, just enough to make him notice the soft shape of her mouth, and hate every man who might notice it after him. For 4 years, he had seen her in aprons, flower dust, and morning light. Now the sight of her dressed for someone else struck something old and possessive in him, something he had no clean name for. Rosa looked up and saw him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You look," Matteo began. Her face lifted, fragile with hope. The word beautiful rose in his chest and stopped there, trapped behind pride, fear, and a lifetime of silence. "Be careful," he said instead. Rosa's expression changed so slightly, most people would have missed it. Matteo did not. He saw the little disappointment she tried to tuck away. She smiled anyway. "I always am," she said. Then she walked out through the front doors, toward the waiting car, through Adrian Vale, toward a trap built from loneliness and soft compliments. Matteo waited until the car disappeared beyond the gates before he moved. Luca stepped out of the shadows beside him. "We have teams on the restaurant, the street, and the kitchen entrance. Adrian arrived 10 minutes ago. Marcan's men have not shown yet." "They will," Matteo said. "And if this really is only a dinner." Matteo looked at the closed gates. The sky above the estate had turned the color of smoke, and somewhere deep in the house, the kitchen had gone quiet without Rosa in it. "Then I will owe her an apology," he said. Luca gave a low, humorless laugh. "That might be the most dangerous thing you have said all day." Matteo did not answer. He was already walking toward the garage, his long coat moving behind him like a shadow. For years, enemies had searched for the hidden weakness in his empire. They had looked for loose money, frightened men, greedy cousins, and careless secrets. None of them had understood the truth. Matteo Viscardi's weakness was not hidden in a vault. She was sitting in the back of a black car, wearing a soft green dress, hoping one ordinary evening might make her feel wanted. And if Adrian Vale had been sent to use that hope against her, then by sunrise, The city would learn what happened when someone mistook Rosa Bellini's kindness for an open door. The black car carried Rosa Bellini through the iron gates and down the long road that curved away from the Viscardi estate, but for the first time in years, she did not look back. She kept both hands folded over the small purse in her lap and tried to focus on the city lights waiting beyond the trees. The driver was one of Matteo's men, of course, silent and broad-shouldered, with eyes that checked every mirror more often than necessary. Rosa told herself she should have expected that. Nothing attached to Matteo Viscardi ever moved through the world without protection. Still, she wanted to pretend, just for one evening, that she was not part of a guarded mansion or a dangerous routine. She wanted to pretend she was only a woman in a green dress, going to dinner with a man who might smile when he saw her. The restaurant Adrian Vale had chosen was tucked inside an old building near the river, the kind of place with golden lamps in the windows and white tablecloths that looked too expensive to stain. Rosa paused outside before stepping in, catching her reflection in the glass. Her curls were still pinned neatly. The green dress rested softly over her body. Her cheeks were flushed from nerves, and her eyes looked brighter than usual. She took a breath and whispered, "You can do this," so quietly even she almost did not hear it. Then she opened the door. Adrian stood as soon as he saw her. He was handsome in a polished, gentle way, with neatly combed brown hair, kind eyes, and a smile that looked practiced enough to be safe. He wore a navy suit and no tie, as if he wanted to appear relaxed but still important. When Rosa approached the table, he looked at her for 1 second longer than she expected, and warmth rose in her face. "Rosa," he said, taking her hand lightly, "you look beautiful." The compliment landed softly, but it also made something inside her tremble. She had been called useful, sweet, reliable, thoughtful, and a good cook. Beautiful was a word she had learned not to wait for. She looked down, smiling in spite of herself. "Thank you," she said. "That is kind of you." "It is honest," Adrian replied, pulling out her chair. For a while, the dinner felt almost normal. That was the dangerous part. Adrian asked about her cooking, and Rosa answered with more excitement than she meant to show. He asked if she had always loved food, and she told him about standing on a wooden stool in her mother's kitchen as a little girl, stirring tomato sauce with both hands wrapped around the spoon. He laughed at the right places. He listened when she talked about bread and basil, and the strange comfort of feeding people who were too proud to admit they were hungry. He did not stare at her body in a cruel way, or look past her like she was furniture. He made her feel, for a few fragile minutes, like she had stepped into the kind of evening other women had without thinking. Across the street, behind the tinted window of a dark car, Matteo watched her smile. He sat in the back seat with Luca beside him, his face unreadable except for the tension in his hands. Outside, rain had begun to mist against the glass, turning the restaurant lights into blurred gold. Luca held a small tablet showing the restaurant floor from 3 hacked security cameras. Rosa sat near the window. Adrian sat across from her, leaning in just enough to seem interested, but not enough to seem hungry. Matteo hated him for the control of it. Real men showed themselves eventually. Liars measured every breath. "She looks happy," Luca said carefully. Matteo did not answer. "She also looks safe for the moment." Matteo's eyes stayed fixed on the window. "For the moment is not enough." Inside, Adrian ordered wine and asked if Rosa preferred red or white. She admitted she barely knew, and he smiled as if that pleased him. The waiter poured something pale into her glass. Rosa took 1 small sip, then set it down. Her nerves were beginning to quiet, but not completely. Something about Adrian's attention had shifted, not enough to frighten her, but enough to make her heart step lightly. "So," Adrian said, cutting into his meal with smooth, careful hands, "what is it like working in a place like the Viscardi estate?" Rosa's smile softened. "Busy." "I imagine so. A man like Matteo Viscardi must be demanding." "He can be," Rosa said. Adrian gave a low laugh. That sounds polite. It is polite. Does he keep strange hours? Rosa looked up. The question had not been loud. It had not been sharp, but it touched the edge of something private. Matteo's hours were not just habits. They were movements inside a world people died trying to understand. He works a lot, she said. Of course. Men like that never rest, do they? Adrian leaned back slightly. Does he still take his breakfast in the study every morning? Rosa's fingers tightened around her fork. Outside, Matteo saw the change in her face before Luca did. His body went still. There, he said. Luca glanced at the camera feed. He pushed too soon. Inside the restaurant, Rosa tried to keep her voice light. I really would rather not talk about my employer. Of course, Adrian said instantly, almost too gently. Forgive me. I was only curious. Your cousin told me you cook for a powerful family. I suppose I wondered how lonely it must feel, being so close to a world that never really lets you in. That was clever, too clever. The words found a soft bruise and pressed. Rosa looked down at her plate, her appetite fading. I am not lonely there, she said, though the answer felt thinner than she wanted. No? Adrian's eyes held hers. A woman like you should not be hidden in a kitchen, Rosa. You should be taken places, admired, asked what you want, not just what someone else needs. For one dangerous second, Rosa wanted to believe him. Not because Adrian mattered. He did not. But because the words did. Because that morning, Matteo had looked at her in the green dress and told her only to be careful. Because she had wanted him to say something else. Because she had spent 4 years caring for a man who noticed everything except the one truth that mattered most. She set her fork down. I think I should go soon, she said. Adrian's smile did not disappear. It simply cooled. Before dessert? He asked. I am not very hungry anymore. That is a shame, he said. I ordered something special. At that moment, a waiter approached with a small white plate in one hand. On it sat a delicate almond cake, dusted with sugar, shining with honey, and decorated with a few thin slices of pear. It was beautiful. Too beautiful. The waiter placed it in front of Rosa with a slight bow. Compliments of the house, he said. Rosa stared at the cake. Almond, honey, pear, all things she loved, all things someone might know if they had watched her closely enough. Her stomach turned cold. Across the street, Luca's phone buzzed. He read the message, and the calm left his face. The waiter, he said. False name. He entered through the service door 20 minutes ago, one of Marcan's. Matteo was already opening the car door. Matteo, Luca warned, but there was no stopping him now. Inside, Adrian picked up Rosa's dessert spoon and held it out to her. One bite, he said softly. Then I will stop asking questions. Rosa did not take the spoon. The waiter behind her shifted. It was a small movement, almost nothing. But Rosa had worked around armed men long enough to recognize when a room changed shape. The air near her back felt wrong. The exit felt farther away than before. Adrian, she said, her voice quiet, who are you? For the first time all evening, his smile looked real. Someone who hoped you would make this easier. The spoon never reached her hand. The restaurant doors opened with a force that turned every head in the room. Matteo Viscardi stepped inside wearing a black coat darkened by rain, his face calm in the way winter is calm before it kills the ground. 2 of his men entered behind him. Luca came in through the side entrance. The waiter's hand moved toward his jacket, but Matteo was faster. He crossed the room and knocked the dessert plate from the table so hard it shattered against the wall, honey and cake scattering across the floor. Rosa gasped and stood, her chair scraping back. Adrian rose too, but Matteo's hand closed around the front of his suit and drove him back against the table before he could speak. Adrian Vale, Matteo said, his voice low enough that people leaned away to avoid hearing it. That name is an insult to anyone with a memory. Adrian's face hardened. The softness vanished. The charming dinner companion disappeared, as if he had never existed, leaving only a cold-eyed stranger in an expensive suit. "You followed her," Adrian said. Matteo's stare did not move. "You drugged her." "Not yet." Not. The words had barely left Adrian's mouth before Matteo struck him. The sound cracked through the restaurant, sharp and final. Several diners screamed. Chairs scraped. The waiter tried to run, but Luca caught him near the service door and slammed him against the wall, with one arm twisted behind his back. Two other men stood from separate tables, hands moving under their jackets, only to find Matteo's security already behind them. Rosa stood frozen, one hand pressed to her chest, trying to understand how her quiet dinner had turned into a room full of drawn weapons and pale faces. Matteo moved in front of her without looking back, placing his body between hers and every visible threat. That should have comforted her. It did not, because the truth struck her with the same force as fear. He had known. He had followed her. He had watched. He had turned her evening into a trap and never told her she was walking into one. Adrian laughed, blood shining at the corner of his mouth. "There it is," he said, looking past Matteo toward Rosa. "Marcan was right. The cook is the door, not because she knows your numbers or your men, because she makes you careless." Matteo did not deny it. The silence was worse than a confession. Adrian's eyes cut to Rosa, and his voice became crueler. "You should feel honored. We watched half that estate for years. Guards, drivers, suppliers, cousins. None of them got close enough. Then there was you, sweet Rosa with her little notes and warm hands. Everyone trusts the woman who feeds them, and he trusts you most of all." Rosa's eyes filled, but she refused to let the tears fall. Matteo's hand tightened into a fist. "Take him." His men moved in. Adrian did not fight. He only smiled as Luca dragged him away. "You can kill the messenger," Adrian called over his shoulder. "But everyone knows now. Matteo Viscardi has a heart, and it wears a green dress." The room went silent. Matteo turned to Rosa at last, and all the violence left his face so suddenly she almost wished it had stayed. Violence she understood here. Tenderness she did not. "Rosa," he said. She stepped back. The small movement hit him harder than any blade could have. "You knew," she whispered. His eyes darkened with something close to pain. "I suspected. You knew enough to follow me. I had to protect you." "No," Rosa said, and this time her voice did not shake. "You had to control the situation. There is a difference." Around them, the restaurant remained frozen in frightened silence. Matteo's men waited for orders. Luca watched carefully, saying nothing. Rosa reached for her purse, with hands that trembled only slightly. "You let me walk in here believing this was my choice," she said. "You let me sit across from a man you were investigating. You watched me smile at him. You watched me almost eat poison. I would never have let him hurt you. But you let me feel foolish." Her voice broke then, and the pain in it was softer than anger but far more damaging. "You let me hope, Matteo, and you never once trusted me enough to tell me the truth." Matteo looked as if he wanted to reach for her, and did not know whether his hands had the right. "You are coming home," he said. Rosa shook her head. "No, I am not." The words landed like a shot in the middle of his chest. "Rosa, I am going to my aunt's diner, alone. If you send men after me, I will never forgive you." Matteo's entire life had been built on refusing impossible terms. But standing there, with broken dessert on the floor and tears in Rosa's eyes, he understood with a strange, quiet terror that forcing her would be the one way to lose her completely. He turned to Luca. "Have a car brought around. No escort inside. No visible tail." Rosa gave a sad little laugh. "Visible?" Matteo closed his eyes briefly. "Rosa, I am tired," she said. "I am tired of being protected like something too soft to survive." I have lived in your house for 4 years. I know what danger sounds like when it walks on marble. I did not need you to make decisions around me. I needed you to speak to me." Then she walked away from him, through the ruined restaurant, past the men with guns and the strangers staring with open mouths. Matteo stayed exactly where he was until the door closed behind her. For the first time in many years, Luca saw his boss look truly lost. The days that followed were quiet in a way the Viscardi estate had never known. Business continued because business always continued. Trucks moved, meetings happened, men came and went with low voices and careful eyes. Silvio Marcan pulled his people back after Adrian's capture, either out of fear or strategy. Matteo's empire remained strong. Nothing collapsed. No enemy broke through the gates. No police car appeared at the end of the road. No blood was spilled inside the walls. And yet, the mansion felt ruined. The kitchen still produced meals, but no one lingered there. Elena did her best, but the food tasted like duty. The morning tray appeared on Matteo's desk each day, but the espresso was never quite bitter enough. The porridge never had the right balance of honey and salt, and the medicine sat beside the bowl without a note tucked under the spoon. Matteo took the pills. He left the food mostly untouched. On the third morning, Luca entered the study and found him staring at a blank piece of paper. "You are going to frighten the staff if you keep not eating," Luca said. "I frighten the staff when I breathe." True, but Rosa made it seem charming. Matteo looked up. Luca sighed. "She is safe. At her aunt's diner, I have men 2 blocks away, plain clothes, like you ordered. She has not left, except to buy groceries and walk around the block." "Does she ask about the estate?" "No." Matteo looked back at the paper. Luca softened, just a little. "Does she ask about you?" The silence answered for him. Later that night, Matteo walked into the kitchen alone. The room was dark, except for the small light above the stove. Without Rosa, it felt like a stage after the actors had gone, all copper pans and clean counters and absence. He stood there for a long time, breathing in faint traces of rosemary, flour, and lemon oil. Then he saw it. On the lower shelf near the window, half hidden behind a stack of folded towels, was a worn brown notebook. Matteo picked it up carefully. Rosa's recipe book was soft at the corners and stained in places with oil, chocolate, and tomato sauce. Some pages held measurements and instructions. Others held little changes written in the margins. Less pepper for Luca when his stomach is bad. Extra garlic for the night guards. Lemon cake for Elena's birthday. Soup for men who pretend not to need soup. Matteo turned the pages slowly. Then he found his name. For M. almond porridge. Bitter days. More honey, if he looks tired, but refuses to say it. He stopped breathing for a moment. There were more notes below it. Do not let him skip the pills. He thinks no one notices when his hand presses his chest after long meetings. I notice. Another page. Espresso darker when he has not slept. Toasted bread when he is angry. Pears when grief is in the room, even if no one says the word. Another. He carries the whole house like punishment. I wish someone would take care of him without making him feel weak. Matteo sat down at the kitchen table with the notebook in his hands. No enemy had ever done this to him. No threat, no betrayal, no knife in the dark had ever reached so cleanly through the armor he wore. Rosa had not loved him loudly. She had not demanded anything. She had simply watched him with gentle eyes and fed the parts of him he had tried to starve. For 4 years, she had been telling him the truth in meals and notes. For 4 years, he had answered with silence. At dawn, the estate woke to the smell of something burning. Elena found Matteo in the kitchen wearing rolled-up sleeves, his hair less perfect than usual, staring at a pot of almond porridge, as if it had personally betrayed him. The mixture inside was thick, grayish, and smoking at the edges. "Boss," Elena said carefully, "what are you doing?" "Cooking." Yes, she said after a pause. I see the crime. He looked at her. She pressed her lips together, wisely holding back a smile. For Rosa. Matteo looked back at the pot. She said I made decisions around her. Elena stepped closer and inspected the damage. So you are making breakfast at her. I am trying. That may count for something. She picked up a spoon, tasted the porridge, and immediately regretted it. Her face went still with effort. Maybe do not let her eat much of it. An hour later, Matteo arrived at Rosa's aunt's diner without guards at his side. Not at the door, not behind him, not visible. He wore a simple dark coat instead of a suit jacket, and in his hands he carried a covered bowl inside a paper bag that looked entirely too ordinary for a man like him. The diner was small, bright, and warm, with red stools along the counter and old family photographs on the wall. It smelled like coffee, butter, and grilled onions. Rosa was wiping down a table near the back when she saw him. Her hand froze. Aunt Sophia, who was standing behind the counter, took one look at Matteo and quietly disappeared into the kitchen, though not before giving him the kind of look only an aunt could give a feared criminal and survive. Rosa straightened. She wore a simple blue dress and no apron. Her curls were loose today. She looked tired, beautiful, but tired in a way that made Matteo hate himself. I asked you not to come with power, she said. I came alone. Her eyes moved to the window. My men are 2 blocks away, he admitted. I am trying to be honest, not stupid. Despite herself, Rosa almost smiled. Almost. What is in the bag? Matteo looked down, as if he had briefly forgotten he was holding it. An apology. That smells burnt. It is also too salty. This time, Rosa did smile, small and unwilling. You cooked? I attempted porridge. For me? For you. He paused. And for every morning I ate yours without saying thank you. The softness in her face shook him more than anger would have. She gestured to the booth across from her. Matteo sat. Rosa slid in opposite him, leaving the table between them like a border. He placed the bowl in front of her and removed the lid. The porridge looked worse in daylight. Rosa stared at it for several seconds, then began to laugh. Not cruelly, not loudly at first, but the laugh broke out of her like sunlight through a locked room, and Matteo sat there helplessly, watching it with his chest aching. It looks like punishment, she said. It tastes worse. She picked up the spoon and took the smallest bite possible. Her eyes watered instantly. Matteo. I know. Did you salt it 3 times? I lost confidence and tried to fix it. With salt? I panicked. Rosa laughed again, then set the spoon down. The laughter faded, leaving the hurt behind it. Why are you here? Matteo folded his hands on the table. He had commanded rooms full of killers without hesitation, but now the truth felt heavier than any weapon he had ever held. When you left, he said, the estate did not fall apart. My work continued. My men obeyed. My enemies stayed afraid. He looked at her fully, but it stopped feeling like home. Rosa's eyes shone, but she said nothing. I told myself I followed you because of security. That was true, but it was not the whole truth. I was afraid. Not only that Adrian would hurt you, I was afraid he would see you. His voice lowered. Really see you, the way I had been seeing you for years and refusing to admit. Rosa looked down at her hands. Matteo continued, because if he stopped now, pride would find its way back in. I knew the way you took your coffee. I knew you hummed when you baked bread. I knew you gave extra portions to men who were grieving and pretended not to be. I knew the whole house became softer when you entered a room. I knew every note you left me. I kept them. Her eyes lifted quickly. You kept them? In my desk. All of them. Yes. Rosa blinked hard, and one tear slipped down her cheek. I fell in love with you quietly, Matteo said. Through meals, through notes, through the way you looked at me as if there was still something human worth feeding. And because I am a coward in the places that matter, I turned that love into control. I thought if I protected you from everything, I would never have to risk asking you to choose me. Rosa wiped her cheek. I do not need a boss, Matteo. I know. I do not need a cage. I know. I do not need a man who follows me because he cannot bear not owning the room. The words hurt, but he accepted them. I know. Her voice softened. Then what do you think I need? A man brave enough to tell you the truth before danger forces it out of him, Matteo said. A man who trusts you with the ugly parts and lets you decide whether to stay. A man who knows your kindness is not weakness and your softness is not permission. Rosa stared at him for a long moment. And can you be that man? I do not know how yet, he said honestly, but I will learn, if you let me. The diner hummed around them, quiet and ordinary. A coffee machine hissed. Someone laughed in the kitchen. Rain tapped lightly against the front window. Rosa looked at the terrible porridge between them, then at the man who had made it with hands trained for power, not tenderness. You really kept the notes? She asked. Matteo's mouth softened. Every one. I thought you threw them away. I tried once, and? I took it out of the trash before anyone saw. Rosa covered her mouth, and this time the tears came with her smile. Matteo reached across the table slowly, giving her time to pull away. She did not. His fingers closed gently around hers. I am still angry, she whispered. You should be. I am still hurt, I know. And if I come back, it will not be to hide in your kitchen while you decide what is best for me. No. His thumb moved softly over her knuckles. If you come back, it will be because you choose to, and you will stand wherever you want, beside me, away from me, in the kitchen, in the garden, in the middle of a room full of people who will know exactly who you are. Rosa held his gaze. And who am I, Matteo? He answered without hesitation. Rosa Bellini, the woman who turned my house into a home before I was wise enough to deserve it. For a while, neither of them moved. Then Rosa looked at the ruined porridge and sighed. We need to teach you how to cook. Matteo nodded solemnly. That seems fair. And how to talk before you start a surveillance operation. That may take longer. She laughed, and the sound loosened something deep in him. When she stood, he stood too. She came around the table slowly, not rushing, not surrendering, not forgetting what had happened. She simply stepped close enough to place her hand against his chest, right over the heart he had spent half his life pretending not to have. You scared me, she said. I scared myself. Good, she whispered. Remember that. Then she rose onto her toes, and Matteo bent to meet her. The kiss was not a conquest. It was not a claim made in front of frightened strangers or enemies dragged away in blood. It was quieter than that, warmer. A promise still learning how to stand. His hands settled carefully at her waist, not trapping, not taking, only holding. And Rosa let herself lean into him for one breath longer than pride demanded. Months passed before the city saw them together. Rumors had already begun, of course. Rumors always found their way through locked doors. People whispered that Matteo Viscardi had changed, not softened exactly, because his enemies still feared him, and his men still obeyed faster than breathing. But the estate was different. The kitchen was no longer hidden from the heart of the house. Rosa came and went as she pleased. Sometimes she cooked. Sometimes she sat in Matteo's study and read while he worked. Sometimes she argued with him in low voices behind closed doors, and the staff learned that the only person brave enough to tell Matteo Viscardi he was being ridiculous was a plus-size woman with flour on her sleeve and love in her eyes. He still had guards. He still had enemies. He still checked exits when they entered a room. But he told her the truth now, even when the truth was ugly, especially then. Rosa did not make his world innocent. She made it honest inside the walls they shared. The hospital fundraiser came in early spring. hosted under the Viscardi family name in a grand ballroom filled with white flowers, gold lights, polished floors, and people who smiled carefully because they knew half the city's future was being decided between glasses of champagne. Reporters waited near the entrance. Donors whispered behind jeweled hands. Politicians stood straighter when Matteo entered. Then Rosa stepped in beside him. She wore deep emerald this time, richer than the soft green dress from the night everything changed. The fabric moved around her curves with quiet confidence, elegant and unapologetic. Her dark curls fell over one shoulder, and a small diamond pin shaped like a basil leaf glittered near her heart. She was not hiding behind an apron. She was not standing 3 steps back. Her hand rested in Matteo's, and when the room looked at her, she did not shrink. The whispers started immediately. Matteo heard them. So did Rosa. He looked down at her. "Are you all right?" She squeezed his hand. "Yes." A reporter stepped forward, holding a recorder. "Mr. Viscardi, can you tell us who is accompanying you tonight?" The old Matteo would have ignored the question. The old Matteo would have protected privacy by turning silence into a wall. But Rosa had not returned to his life to be hidden behind walls. He turned toward the cameras. "This is Rosa Bellini," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. "She is the woman who taught me that power means nothing if there is no one who makes you want to come home." The room went still. Rosa looked up at him, and for once, Matteo did not hide anything. Not the devotion, not the pride, not the soft, dangerous truth that had once made him furious because he could not control it. A camera flashed. Then another. Rosa smiled, not because the world had finally decided to see her, but because she no longer needed the world's permission to be visible. By the end of the night, the donations had broken every record the hospital had ever seen. Matteo gave speeches he hated. Rosa charmed doctors, nurses and donors without even trying. Luca stood near the back wall with a glass of sparkling water, watching his boss follow Rosa with his eyes every time she crossed the room. He shook his head and smiled to himself. The city feared Matteo Viscardi. His enemies still checked their doors at night because of him, but inside the estate on the hill, something stronger than fear had taken root. The mansion remained dangerous to anyone foolish enough to threaten it. The gates still locked at dusk. The guards still walked the walls. The shadows still knew Matteo's name. But in the morning, there was espresso on the desk, almond porridge warm beside it, and medicine waiting on a folded napkin. Sometimes Rosa still left notes. Sometimes Matteo left one first. "Eat before you scare someone," hers would say. "I am trying," his would answer. And somewhere between the bitter coffee, the burnt lessons, the quiet laughter, and the truth they had finally learned to speak, the coldest house in the city became warm enough to be called home. The Mafia boss had 27 experts surrounding his father's roulette table, but the only person in the room who knew how to open it was the fat night cleaner mopping cherry syrup off the floor. Mara Bell did not know that yet. At that moment she only knew her knees hurt, her back ached, and one of the richest men in the city had somehow managed to spill half a bottle of red liquor across black marble and walk away like floors cleaned themselves. It was 2:37 in the morning, inside the private penthouse club above Valenti Tower, and every man in the room was afraid of Rocco Valenti except her. Not because she was brave. Brave people stood tall. Mara mostly leaned on her mop handle and tried not to limp. She was not afraid because fear took energy, and after 6 hours of scrubbing cigar ash out of velvet booths, collecting broken glass from under card tables, and pretending she did not hear rich men laugh at women who served them, Mara did not have much energy left to donate to a mafia boss's mood. Rocco Valenti stood near the center of the room in a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, watching men fail him. That was the first thing Mara noticed about him. He did not yell. He did not pace. He did not slam his fist into tables like angry men in bars. He simply stood still and the stillness made everyone else move faster. His name had a strange effect on rooms. People lowered their voices before they said it, as if the name itself might turn its head and listen. He was rich in the heavy, silent way old families were rich, with polished floors, private elevators, guards who wore suits better than most bankers, and a club where the glasses probably cost more than Mara's weekly groceries. But money was not what made people nervous around him. Money made people greedy. Rocco Valenti made people careful. The antique roulette table sat beneath the low gold lights like something dragged out of another century. Its wood was dark, almost black in places, with carved leaves twisting along the rim, and small brass numbers worn soft from decades of hands, smoke, luck, and bad decisions. Mara had cleaned around that table many times, but she had never seen men kneel before it like priests before an altar. Locksmiths circled it with thin tools and white gloves. Tech specialists crouched beneath it with scanners and small black cases full of wires. Security men watched the doors, watched each other, watched Rocco, and pretended not to watch the clock. The table had belonged to Rocco's father. Everyone in the club seemed to know that. No one said it out loud, but the old thing carried family weight. The kind people stepped around carefully. Mara pushed her mop in slow half-moons across the marble and tried to stay invisible. She was good at that. Fat women became invisible in expensive rooms in a special way. People still saw the body, but not the person inside it. They saw hips when she squeezed past service carts. They saw knees that bent with effort. They saw the way her uniform stretched at the buttons, and the way sweat gathered at her neck under the stiff collar. They did not see her eyes. That was usually their mistake. Mara had sharp eyes because life had made her use them. When you cleaned after people, you learned who was careless, who was cruel, who lied about where they had been, who drank too much, who cried in bathrooms, who left lipstick on the wrong glass, who dropped pills near private booths, who wiped fingerprints from things they should never have touched. Powerful people believed secrets lived in safes and phones. Mara knew they lived in stains. Tonight, all the secrets seemed to be inside the roulette table. A narrow drawer under the wheel had been exposed, its lock shining beneath a brass plate. Two men worked near it with tiny instruments, whispering to each other in tight, frustrated voices. Another man held a thermal camera close to the side panel. A fourth kept warning everyone about a heat capsule inside the compartment. Mara had heard the phrase 3 times already. Heat capsule. Destroy the key. No second chance. The words floated around the room with the same quiet panic as smoke from a fire not yet seen. Hidden inside the table was a small steel compartment. Hidden inside that compartment was a data key Rocco needed before dawn. Mara did not understand what kind of data could make 27 grown men sweat through tailored jackets, but she understood enough from the broken pieces of conversation. A rival syndicate was moving on one of Rocco's warehouses. His younger cousin, Nico, was trapped somewhere inside that mess. If the key was not found before morning, a building would be taken, men would die, and a young man with the Valenti name would not see another sunrise. That part made Mara look up, not because she cared about Rocco's warehouse. Warehouses changed hands. Rich men lost property and called it war. Poor people lost homes and called it Tuesday. But the cousin was younger. Nico, one of the guards had said, voice low with worry. Only 23, Rocco's aunt's boy. Mara had a soft spot for anyone younger being used as pressure against someone older. She knew what it felt like to have survival depend on other people's cruelty being delayed. A man in a grey suit snapped his fingers near her cart. Can you take that thing somewhere else? Mara looked at the cherry syrup spreading under the leg of a leather chair. This thing is keeping your shoes from sticking to the floor. He frowned as if the mop had spoken without permission. We're working. I can see that. Someone laughed softly, then stopped when Rocco turned his head. The grey-suited man's face tightened. Mara dipped the mop into the bucket and wrung it out with more force than necessary. Dirty water twisted down into the yellow wringer. Her knees complained when she bent, a deep ache blooming under both kneecaps. She ignored it. She had ignored worse. At 41, Mara had learned that pain did not disappear just because it was inconvenient. It rode with you. You gave it a seat and kept moving. The experts kept failing. First they tried the drawer, then the hinges, then the underside of the wheel. Someone suggested drilling a narrow access point through the bottom panel, and another man nearly shouted that the vibration could trigger the heat capsule. Rocco did not shout. He only looked at the man who had suggested drilling until the poor fool closed his mouth and stepped back. The club grew quieter. Outside the penthouse windows, the city glittered like it had no idea men were deciding whether other men lived or died above it. Mara cleaned around the edge of the room, past spilled whiskey, crushed lime, cigar ash, and a little smear of blood near the corner of a table where some important person had cut his thumb and left the napkin for someone else to collect. She should have finished and left. Her shift ended at 3. Her landlord had already sent 2 messages that day, each one more polite than the last, which meant the lock threat was close. Mara was $380 short on rent. $380 was a laughable amount of money in this room. It was probably less than the cost of the cufflinks on the man currently scanning the roulette table with a device that looked like it belonged in a hospital. But in Mara's life, $380 was a wall, a lock, a night spent choosing which bill could bleed longer. She rolled her cart closer to the table because a thick trail of dark syrup had dried near one of its carved legs. Cherry liqueur, maybe. Expensive enough to be served in crystal, cheap enough to stain like a crime. She knelt carefully, one hand on the cart for balance, and began loosening the sticky patch with a plastic scraper. While she worked, the men above her argued about circuits and pressure plates. Mara listened without seeming to listen. She always did. Cleaning taught you that people said more when they forgot you counted as a person. The electronic plate is beneath the wheel, one specialist muttered. The drawer is only the access face. If we can bypass the plate, you cannot bypass what you cannot identify, another said. The lock is old but modified. Mechanical base, modern trigger. The father liked tricks, one of Rocco's men said. Old Valenti never put the real thing where men expected it. Mara paused with the scraper in her hand. Old dirt had layers. That was what most people did not understand. A dirty thing was not just dirty. Dirt told time. Dust settled differently than ash. Grease darkened where fingers returned again and again. Wax gathered where someone polished what people could see and ignored what they actually touched. Alcohol sugar hardened in seams. Oil crept into cracks. A surface used by real hands looked different from a surface admired by strangers. Mara had spent years cleaning casino floors, hotel bars, private rooms, back rooms, church halls, strip club booths, and one mayor's office, where the desk had told more truth than the mayor ever did. She knew used wood from decorative wood. She knew old touch from new polish. The specialists were staring at the drawer. Mara stared at the rim. The carved wooden ring around the roulette wheel had a dark line running through one section, but not the kind of line that belonged to decoration. It was too straight under the curls of carved leaves. Too deliberate. It should have been visible, maybe, if not for the blackened build-up pressed deep along the seam. Decades of hand grease, furniture wax, smoke, cigar ash, something glossy and dark, like old syrup. Everyone had assumed the rim was solid because the drawer looked important, but the rim had the wear. Not the drawer. The drawer was too clean. Its brass plate had been touched often enough to invite attention, but not often enough to be the truth. Mara leaned closer. Her knee popped. She winced, then shifted her weight and dragged the scraper gently along the rim under the lip of the table. A thin black shaving curled away. "Do not touch that," one of the tech men snapped. Ara looked up. "I'm cleaning it. This is not a bar top." "No," she said, rubbing the black residue between her fingers. Bar tops are usually less dramatic. The grey-suited man from earlier stepped toward her. Move away from the table. Mara stood slowly. She did not like standing quickly anymore. Her joints did not trust sudden decisions. You're working on the wrong part. The room changed. Not loudly. No one gasped. No chair scraped back. But attention moved like a cold draft. A few men looked at her. A few smiled. One locksmith actually laughed under his breath. The grey-suited man stared. "Excuse me? The drawer is a decoy." The laugh became louder. Mara wiped her hand on a rag tucked into her apron. "The real release is in the rim." One of the specialists gave her the kind of smile educated men gave women they planned to dismiss gently, so they could feel kind afterward. "And you know this because nobody touched that drawer enough." His smile faded a little. Mara pointed to the brass plate. "It's shiny, but not worn right. Polished, yes. Used, no. The wear marks are along the wood rim near the wheel. See that black seal in the carving? That is not shadow. That is old grease and wax hardened into the seam. If there is a pressure strip, it cannot move because it is glued shut by years of people touching the same spot with dirty hands." Someone snorted. "Dirty hands." "Yes," Mara said. "The thing everyone in this room has, and nobody thinks about." The grey-suited man reached for her arm. "Enough." Mara stepped back before he could touch her. Not fast, but firm. "Do not shove me because you can't open a table." His face darkened. A guard moved. Another man whispered, "Careful." Then Rocco spoke for the first time in several minutes. "Let her finish." The words were quiet. They landed hard. Mara turned toward him. Up close, Rocco Valenti looked less handsome than dangerous, which was not the same thing. Handsome men wanted to be admired. Dangerous men did not care if you admired them before the room went dark. His eyes were black or nearly black beneath the warm club lights, and they studied her with a focus that made Mara feel, for the first time that night, entirely visible. "What is your name?" he asked. "Mara Bell. You clean here. 5 nights a week. And you believe 27 specialists missed dirt. I believe 27 specialists came in looking for a lock." She glanced back at the rim. "I clean what hands leave behind." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Rocco looked toward the clock on the wall. 2:49. Dawn was not close, but it was no longer far either. His cousin's life seemed to sit inside that quiet calculation. "You have one chance," he said. The grey-suited man opened his mouth. Rocco did not look at him. "If she damages the key, I will remember who stopped her from working sooner." That ended every objection. Mara exhaled through her nose and reached for her cart. She was aware of everyone watching now, which usually made her hands less steady. But this was not pouring coffee for rich women who smirked at her uniform or carrying glassware past men who stepped into her path for fun. This was cleaning. Cleaning, she understood. She took out a garment steamer with a cracked handle, a small bottle of rubbing alcohol, a plastic scraper, a roll of cheap white towels, and a tin of powdered chalk she used sometimes to find wet seams in stone. One of the specialists stared at the chalk as if she had brought a chicken bone and a prayer. "You cannot use heat near the compartment," he said. "I'm not heating the compartment. I'm softening the wax in the rim." Mara tested the steamer away from the table until a thin breath of warm vapor rose. "If the heat capsule is inside the drawer and the release is here, then forcing the drawer is the dangerous part, not this." Rocco's gaze did not leave her. "You are certain?" "No." Mara looked at him honestly. "But I am more certain than they are." A few faces tightened at that. Rocco's mouth moved almost invisibly. Not quite a smile, not quite anything safe enough to name. Mara began with alcohol on a towel, pressing it gently along the blackened seam. The smell rose sharp and clean under the heavy perfume of cigar smoke and liquor. She did not rush. Rushing ruined things. Rushing broke old wood, tore fabric, spread stains, made people make mistakes and then blame the nearest woman. She softened 1 inch at a time, then used the scraper to lift the dark buildup without digging into the carving. Black residue flaked away in tiny curls. Under it, a fine line appeared, pale where air had not touched it in years. The room went very still. "There," Mara whispered, mostly to herself. The specialist with the thermal camera leaned in, despite himself. "That could be decorative separation." "Could be," Mara said, "but it isn't." She dusted powdered chalk along the line and blew gently. White settled into one narrow seam and stopped at both ends. Not a crack. A moving piece. A hidden strip. Rocco stepped closer. One guard shifted behind him, nervous, but Rocco ignored it. Mara could feel him watching her hands. Not her body. Not her limp. Not the cheap shoes with the split near the sole. Her hands. It had been a long time since anyone powerful looked at what she could do before deciding what she was worth. She placed the steamer close again, then wiped, scraped, and pressed lightly. Nothing happened. One man made a small sound. Mara did not look up. "It has been stuck for years. Give it a second." She worked farther along the rim. More black buildup loosened. Her fingers began to ache from the pressure. Her knees burned from standing in one place too long. Sweat slid down the back of her neck under her uniform collar. She adjusted her grip, braced one hand against the table, and pressed the hidden strip with the heel of her other hand. Nothing. The gray-suited man sighed. Mara closed her eyes for half a breath. She thought of her landlord's text. She thought of the bus stop after work, the one where the light flickered and men in passing cars sometimes slowed down. She thought of how tired she was of being one bill away from begging. Then she shifted her palm lower, to the place where the wear mark was deepest, where hundreds of hands had rested, while men waited for a little white ball to decide whether hope was stupid. She pressed. The roulette wheel clicked, not loud, just one soft, old sound, like a bone moving back into place. Every man in the room froze. Then the wheel dropped half an inch. A narrow steel compartment slid open beneath the inner bowl of the table. No smoke, no spark, no heat, no destroyed key. Just a small dark cavity where a silver data key rested inside a velvet-lined slot, untouched after all that panic. For several seconds, no one spoke. The experts stared. The guards stared. Rocco stared at the open compartment as if his father had reached from the grave and laughed at all of them. Mara lowered her hand. The room had never felt so quiet. Rocco stepped forward and removed the key himself. He held it between 2 fingers, then looked at one of his men. "Send it." The man moved fast, taking the key as if it weighed more than metal. Phones came out. Orders were whispered. Somewhere, a secure line opened. Somewhere else in the city, maybe near a warehouse full of men with guns and fear in their mouths, the balance of the night shifted. Mara did not know exactly what she had saved. She only knew the air changed. The pressure broke, not completely but enough for men to breathe again. One guard murmured, "Nico's clear." Rocco's eyes closed for 1 second. Only one. When they opened, the softness was gone, hidden before most people could notice it. Mara noticed. Of course she did. The specialists began speaking all at once, explaining, justifying, trying to place professional words around the simple fact that a cleaning woman had opened what they could not. Rocco silenced them with a look. Then he turned to Mara. "You solved it. I cleaned it. You saved my cousin. I unstuck a table. That table had 20 men afraid to breathe near it. 27, Mara said. Again, that almost smile touched his mouth and vanished. 27. Mara bent to gather her tools because suddenly standing there under everyone's attention felt worse than being ignored. Her hands shook a little now that the work was done. That often happened. During the thing, she held steady. After the thing, her body remembered it had been scared. She put the alcohol away, then the scraper, then the chalk. A black flake of old residue clung to her finger. She rubbed it off with her thumb. Rocco watched her pack. There was a reward. Mara did not look up. For the experts? For whoever opened it. Well, that seems poorly planned. $60,000. Her hands stopped over the towel roll. The number entered her body strangely, not like joy, more like danger. $60,000 was not money. It was weather. It was a storm large enough to tear the roof off her life. With $60,000, she could pay rent for years, fix her teeth, buy shoes that did not make her knees scream, take a cab without calculating which meal it stole from, sleep one night without listening for footsteps in the hall. But $60,000 in cash from Rocco Valenti at 3 in the morning was not just freedom, it was evidence. It was a target. It was the kind of money men followed. "No," she said. Rocco became still again. "No? No, thank you." One of the guards blinked. The grey-suited man looked at her like she had just refused oxygen. Rocco studied her. "You do not want $60,000. "I did not say that. I said no." "Why?" Mara zipped the pouch on her cart. "Because I can't deposit it. I can't explain it. I can't walk through my neighborhood with it unless you also plan to send 3 armed men to live in my hallway. And if my landlord sees even a corner of that kind of cash, my rent will become a math problem with teeth." She finally looked at him. "I am poor, Mr. Valenti. Not stupid." The room absorbed that too. Rocco's expression changed, not softening exactly, but sharpening in a different direction. Respect, maybe. Mara did not trust it. Respect from dangerous men could still become a cage if it turned the wrong way. "What do you need?" he asked. The question unsettled her more than the reward. People like him usually asked what things cost, not what people needed. Mara looked toward the windows where the city shone cold and far away. Then she gave him the smallest truth she could survive giving. "I'm $380 short on rent, and I need enough for a cab home." Rocco said nothing. Her face warmed. "You asked." "I did. I'm not asking for charity." "No," he said. "You are asking for exactly what solves the problem." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a folded stack of bills. Not 60,000. Not a performance. 500s, crisp and clean. He held them out. Mara stared at the money before taking it. "This is too much. It is less than you earned. It is more than I asked for. It includes the cab." "That must be a dramatic cab." His eyes held hers. "Then eat before you go home." For some reason that nearly undid her. Not the money, not the reward, the food, the quiet assumption that someone who had worked all night might be hungry. Mara took the bills and folded them into the small pocket inside her uniform, the one where she kept her bus card and emergency coins. Her fingers pressed the pocket flat once, making sure the money was real. "Thank you," she said. Rocco's voice lowered. "No, thank you, Mara Bell." Hearing her full name in his mouth made the room feel smaller. She pushed her cart toward the service exit, aware of eyes following her now, not looking through her, looking at her. It was not as pleasant as people thought being seen would be. Sometimes being invisible was safer. She pressed the elevator button with her elbow and waited while behind her, Rocco's men returned to their phones, the specialists returned to their excuses, and the antique roulette table sat open under the lights, its secret exposed because old dirt had told the truth. Just before the elevator doors closed, Mara looked back once. Rocco Valenti was still watching her, not like a man watching a cleaner leave, like a man watching a door he had not known existed begin to open. The elevator doors closed on Rocco Valenti's eyes, but they did not leave Mara Bell alone. They seemed to follow her down through all 43 floors of polished silence, through the private club, through the marble lobby, through the service corridor where the air smelled like bleach and cold metal, and even out into the back alley where a black car waited instead of the cab she had planned to call. One of Rocco's men stood beside it, with his hands folded in front of him and his expression carefully blank. Mara stopped under the yellow security light, her cleaning cart behind her, her purse clutched tight against her ribs, and the $500 pressed so firmly inside her uniform pocket that she could feel the edges of the bills against her skin. "I did not ask for a driver," she said. The man opened the back door. "Mr. Valenti said the cab situation was dramatic." Mara stared at him. He did not smile, but something in his face nearly did. His words. Mara looked toward the street beyond the alley. It was almost 3 in the morning, and the city had entered that strange hour when even the loud neighborhood seemed to breathe with one eye open. A bus hissed at the corner. Somewhere, a bottle broke. The wind pushed trash along the curb in small, nervous circles. A reasonable woman would have said no. A reasonable woman would also have owned shoes without cardboard tucked inside the sole, and a landlord who did not text threats between polite greetings. Mara walked to the car, then paused before climbing in. "Is this ride part of the 500? "No, ma'am." "Do not call me ma'am, like you are about to bury me respectfully." This time, the man did smile. "I'm just taking you home." That is what kidnappers say when they have manners. He glanced up at the security camera over the service door. Mr. Valenti would not kidnap a woman he just paid. Mara climbed into the car. That sounds like something a kidnapper's co-worker would say. The ride home was quiet. Too quiet. The car smelled like leather, rain, and money that had never had to be counted twice. Mara sat with her purse on her lap and watched the city change outside the tinted windows. Towers became offices. Offices became shuttered restaurants. Restaurants became laundromats, check cashing shops, closed beauty supply stores, and apartment buildings with fire escapes like black ribs against the brick. The driver did not ask questions. He did not take strange turns. He stopped outside Mara's building, stepped out, opened her door, and waited on the sidewalk until she unlocked the front entrance. That unsettled her more than if he had been rude. Inside, the hallway smelled like onions, old carpet, and the lemon cleaner she had once suggested to the super because the old pine smell made the whole building feel like a sad motel. The bulb over the mailboxes flickered twice. Mara climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on the rail, knees aching harder now that the night was ending. Pain always became louder when work stopped. She reached the 3rd floor, saw the folded paper taped to her door, and felt the night's brief miracle begin to sink. Final notice. Rent balance due. Lock change scheduled. Mara pulled the paper down without reading the rest. Her hands did not shake this time. She went inside, locked the door, and leaned against it for a moment in the dark. Her apartment was small, but it was hers when the rent was paid. A narrow living room, a kitchen with one good burner, a bedroom barely wide enough for the bed, and a bathroom mirror with a crack across the lower left corner. There were no velvet booths here, no chandeliers, no men with guns pretending they were decorations. Just a pile of folded laundry, a chipped mug in the sink, and a plant on the windowsill that refused to die even though Mara often forgot to be kind to it. She turned on the lamp, removed the money from her pocket, and counted it twice on the kitchen table. $500. She separated $380 for rent, $40 for the late fee she knew her landlord would suddenly remember, $20 for groceries, $20 for the electric bill, and the rest for whatever new emergency was already walking toward her in shoes she could not hear yet. Then she sat down and laughed once, very softly, because $60,000 had been too dangerous, but $500 had made her feel like she had stolen the moon. She should have slept. Instead, She kept seeing the roulette wheel drop. She kept hearing that small, old click. She kept seeing the room go silent when the men who had not noticed her were forced to understand that she had noticed them all along. By noon, her landlord had the rent. By 1, her phone had 3 missed calls from an unknown number. By 1:15, a black envelope appeared beneath her door, without footsteps in the hall. Mara stood over it for a full minute before touching it. The paper was thick, matte, and absurd. People who had money loved making paper feel important. Inside was a single card with an address downtown and a time written in clean black ink. No please, no explanation, no threat, just her name, the address, and 4 words. Rocco Valenti requests you. Mara read it 3 times, then looked around her apartment as if someone might step out from behind the refrigerator and explain why a Mafia boss had developed the manners of a wedding invitation. She should have thrown it away. She should have called in sick to life and stayed under a blanket until the city found someone else to bother. But money sat folded in neat piles on her table, and the rent notice lay crumpled in the trash, and some stubborn part of her had awakened in that penthouse club and refused to go quietly back to sleep. So at the appointed time, Mara put on her cleanest black pants, the blouse with only 1 missing button hidden under a cardigan, and the shoes that hurt least. She took the bus downtown because she did not trust any car she did not request herself, and she arrived outside a narrow stone building between a private bank and a gallery that seemed to sell paintings mostly to people who hated walls. A guard at the door said her name before she did. That was not comforting. Rocco's office was on the top floor, not as high as the club, not as glittering, but quieter, in a way that felt more dangerous. The room had dark wood shelves, tall windows, a long desk with nothing unnecessary on it, and a view of the river under a grey afternoon sky. Rocco stood near the window holding a phone, listening without speaking. When Mara entered, he ended the call and turned. She noticed what he noticed first, the shoes, then the cardigan, then her hands, always the hands. "You came," he said. "You requested." "I did. Is this the part where you tell me I owe you something because your man drove me home?" "No." "Good. I was ready to argue. I assumed." Mara did not sit until he gestured toward the chair. Even then, she lowered herself carefully, pretending her knees did not object. Rocco saw that too. She wished, briefly and sharply, that he would stop seeing so much. "I have a business," he said. "You have several, I'm guessing. One has a problem. Most businesses do." The Gilded Room. Mara had heard of it. Everyone had heard of it, even people who would never be allowed near the front door. A private casino hidden inside a renovated theater downtown. Gold ceilings, velvet walls, famous guests, no photographs, no public membership list. The kind of place where people did not gamble because they needed money. They gambled because losing it beautifully made them feel alive. "It has been losing money for months," Rocco said. "My accountants say the books are clean. My security team says no one is stealing." "And you think they're wrong?" "I know they're wrong." "Then fire them." "I may. Later." Mara folded her hands in her lap. "Why am I here?" "Because last night, 27 trained men saw a table. You saw what touched it. That was dirt. That was evidence. Evidence is what people call dirt when rich men finally need it." For the first time since she entered, Rocco looked almost amused. He walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and placed a slim folder in front of her. Mara did not touch it. "I want you inside the Gilded Room tonight," he said. "As cleaning staff, I want you to look at what my professionals ignore." Mara stared at him. "You want me to spy? I want you to audit. With a mop. With whatever works." She leaned back slowly. "And if I say no, then you leave. My driver takes you home if you accept the ride." You keep the 500. You say that like men in your position are used to being told no. They are not. But you would allow it. His eyes held hers. I am asking because you are useful, not because you are owned. The sentence was clean, but Mara did not trust clean sentences from dangerous men. Clean things hid stains best. What does it pay? She asked. 10,000 if you find nothing. The full 60,000 if you find the leak. Her mouth went dry. There it was again, the storm, the roof-tearing money, the kind of money that did not solve one problem but several, and that made room for new ones with polished shoes. Rocco watched the calculation move across her face. You said cash would make you a target. It would. I can pay through a consulting contract. Taxes withheld. Clean. Mara blinked. You made a consulting contract for a night cleaner? You opened my father's table with chalk and steam. I can manage paperwork. That should not have made her want to smile, so she did not. She looked down at the folder at last. Her fingers rested on the edge but did not open it. If I do this, I do it my way. No one pushes me into locked rooms. No one grabs my arm. No one tells the staff I am anything except cleaning crew. And if I say something smells wrong, you listen before your men laugh. Rocco's face became still. Who grabbed your arm last night? No one who matters. Everyone who touches you without permission matters. The room went quiet. Mara looked away first, irritated by the warmth that rose behind her eyes. She had not come here to be protected. Protection from men like Rocco Valenti always came with a shadow behind it. Those are my terms, she said. Accepted. You didn't even pretend to negotiate. I know a good deal when I hear one. That evening, Mara entered the gilded room through the service door with her hair pinned back, her old cleaning badge clipped to her shirt, and a new black phone in her pocket that she had not asked for and did not like. Rocco had given it to her before she left his office. For emergencies, he had said. I have a phone, not one that reaches me. That was not a problem I knew I had. It is now solved. She had almost handed it back. Then she thought of landlords, dark bus stops, men who snapped fingers at cleaners, and $60,000 with taxes withheld. She put the phone in her pocket and hated how heavy safety could feel. The gilded room was exactly as ridiculous as she expected, and more beautiful than she wanted it to be. The old theater bones remained beneath the luxury. A domed ceiling painted midnight blue, gold balconies, crystal lights, private rooms hidden behind velvet curtains, card tables arranged under soft lamps, a bar that glowed like amber. Everything smelled like expensive soap, fresh flowers, citrus oil, champagne, smoke no one admitted was smoke, and money pretending it had no odor. Mara was introduced as a temporary night cleaner from one of the service companies. The manager, Julian Cross, shook her hand without really touching it. He was slim, silver-haired, charming in the way men became charming when they practiced in mirrors. His smile landed on Mara, measured her uniform, her weight, her plain shoes, and dismissed her so quickly she nearly thanked him for saving time. We're particular here, Julian said. So am I, Mara replied. His smile cooled. Just stay out of the VIP rooms until service clears them. People keep telling me to stay away from the interesting parts of rooms. Julian did not laugh. Rocco was nowhere visible, which was smart. His absence made everyone behave naturally. Or as naturally as people behaved in a private casino where a single bottle of champagne cost more than Mara's rent. She began the way she always began. Not by searching for secrets, by cleaning. The casino floor told its own story. Scuff marks near table legs, heel dents in carpet, champagne trails drying under chairs, a faint powder near the velvet rope where someone had dropped makeup or something less legal. A server who carried trays too high because his shoulder hurt, a bartender who counted certain bottles twice, Security men watching the vault door with such devotion that an elephant could have left through the coatroom wearing diamonds, and no one would have noticed. Mara moved slowly and let the room teach her. The first strange thing was the flowers. There were white roses everywhere, tall arrangements on the bar, smaller ones on side tables, heavy ceramic vases in the VIP hall, fresh, perfect, scentless flowers, arranged with wet green foam and dark, glossy leaves. At first, Mara only noticed them because one vase on the east side table had left a faint crescent scratch in the marble. Too heavy, she thought. Too heavy for roses. But rich people loved heavy things. Heavy doors, heavy glasses, heavy jewelry. They trusted weight because it felt expensive. Then she smelled orange oil, not from the bar, not from the kitchen, from one VIP room after closing. Room 7. Mara entered after the guests left, pushing her cart with one squeaky wheel she had already grown fond of, because it announced her honestly. Room 7 had a round card table, 6 leather chairs, a private liquor cabinet, 2 security cameras, and a vase of white roses on a side pedestal. The air smelled of orange oil, faint and polished, layered over cigar smoke and perfume. Someone had wiped something recently. Not cleaned. Wiped. There was a difference. Cleaning removed evidence because the goal was cleanliness. Wiping moved evidence because the goal was hiding. She crouched near the pedestal. Her knees hated her. She apologized to them silently and touched the floor beneath the vase. A thin, waxy trail marked the marble, almost invisible except where dust had gathered at the edge. The vase had been moved recently, dragged rather than lifted. Strange. The florist crew should have replaced arrangements before opening, not after VIP guests left. Mara stood and looked at the shelf beside the liquor cabinet. One square in the dust was clean, but nothing sat there now. An unused shelf with fresh fingerprints along the back edge. She opened the trash. Broken glass on top. Under it, orange-scented wipes. Under that, green floral foam with a deep rectangular impression pressed into it. Something had sat inside the flowers. Something that was not a stem. By midnight, she had found 3 more traces. Wax trails beneath service carts. A champagne crate that should have been heavy, but was not. A storage shelf that smelled like flowers, though no flowers were stored there. A florist delivery schedule taped near the back entrance with a company name printed in curling letters. Evergreen Atelier. Very elegant, very fake feeling. At 1:15, the florist crew arrived. Mara was polishing brass near the service hall when the back door opened and 2 men rolled in carts, stacked with ceramic vases and fresh arrangements. Julian met them himself. That was wrong. Managers did not personally greet flower deliveries after midnight unless the flowers had teeth. He signed the clipboard, made a joke, touched the second cart twice, then stepped aside while security waved the crew through without checking a single vase. Because the florist serviced Rocco's own events. Because trusted routines became invisible. Because everyone watched the vault. Mara watched the flowers. Her black phone buzzed once. No name appeared, only a message. Anything? Mara looked up. Across the casino floor, behind the dark glass of the closed balcony office, Rocco Valenti stood in shadow. She typed back with one thumb. The roses are lying. There was no reply for several seconds. Then the phone buzzed again. Show me. Mara waited. That was the hardest part. Not noticing, not proving. Waiting until the room gave her enough truth that no charming man could talk over it. Julian moved through the floor with his soft smile, accepting greetings, adjusting a chair, sending a server to the bar, touching the second florist cart again as it passed near the VIP hall. He was careful, very careful, but careful people often forgot that habits could be louder than mistakes. The cart's left wheel squeaked under weight. The fresh arrangements were being brought in, but the cart leaving the building was heavier. Mara followed it with her mop. Near the service exit, one of the florist men paused while Julian spoke quietly into his ear. Mara dipped her mop into the bucket and accidentally rolled it across their path. Dirty water sloshed near the cartwheel. The florist man cursed. "Watch it." "Sorry," Mara said. "Not sorry at all." She bent to mop the spill and used the movement to press her palm against the side of the nearest vase. Cold ceramic, damp at the lip, too heavy, much too heavy, not flour heavy, not water heavy, hidden things heavy. Julian's polished shoe appeared beside her hand. "You're in the way." Mara looked up at him. "I get that a lot. You should return to the main floor. You should search your flowers." His face did not change enough for most people to notice, but Mara saw the small death of his smile. "What did you say?" She stood. "Flowers are light. These aren't." Julian laughed then, smooth and easy. A public laugh. A laugh meant for security, for the florist crew, for anyone close enough to hear and decide she was silly before she became dangerous. "My dear woman, ceramic vases are heavy. Empty ceramic vases are heavy. These are nervous." The florist man shifted. Julian's eyes sharpened. "I think your shift is done." "No," Mara said. "I think yours is." Rocco stepped out from the balcony office. The casino did not go silent at once. It quieted in layers. Cards stopped. Glasses lowered. Conversations thinned into whispers and then nothing. Rocco descended the short staircase slowly, one hand in his pocket, eyes on Julian, then on Mara, then on the cart. Julian recovered beautifully. "Mr. Valenti, there seems to be a misunderstanding with the temporary cleaner." "There often is," Rocco said. "People misunderstand cleaners." Mara grabbed the nearest vase with both hands, her arms strained. Pain shot through her lower back, but she did not stop. One of Rocco's guards moved to help. "No," she said. "Let me." She dragged the vase out onto the empty casino floor, leaving a wet trail across the carpet. Julian stepped forward. Rocco lifted one finger. Julian stopped. Mara looked at Rocco. "You want proof?" "I do." "Then you may want to move your shoes." For the second time in 2 nights, Rocco Valenti almost smiled. Mara raised the vase as high as her body allowed and let it fall. The ceramic shattered across the carpet. White roses collapsed. Wet green foam burst open. High-value casino chips spilled out first, red and black and gold, clattering like hard candy across the floor. Then came bundles of cash, sealed in plastic. Then 2 rare watches wrapped in florist paper. Then a small velvet pouch that opened near Rocco's shoe and scattered diamonds under the soft casino lights. No one moved. Mara's breath came hard. Her back screamed. Her knees were considering retirement, but she stood over the broken flowers and looked at Julian cross. "There," she said. That arrangement was overwatered. Julian tried to run. He made it 3 steps. Rocco's men caught him before the 4th. The florist crew dropped their polished act quickly after that. One tried to bargain. One tried to blame Julian. One asked for a lawyer before anyone mentioned police, which Mara found interesting. The guards opened the remaining vases. More chips, more watches, more cash. A thin ledger, hidden inside a false crate bottom. Fake invoices marked as promotional expenses, broken glassware, floral upgrades, VIP comps, clean books built over dirty habits. Rocco stood in the middle of it all, holding one of the stolen chips between his fingers. "My accountants missed this," he said quietly. "They read numbers," Mara said, breathing through the ache in her back. "Numbers behave when people tell them to. Floors don't. Weight doesn't. Smell doesn't." His gaze moved to her. "And people? People are the messiest surface in any room." Julian was forced to his knees nearby, his silver hair fallen over his forehead, his charm finally stripped down to sweat. "Rocco," he said, voice shaking. "I can explain." Rocco did not look away from Mara. "Can he?" Mara glanced at Julian. She thought of the way he had dismissed her hand before shaking it, the way his smile had tried to make her smaller, the way he had hidden theft inside beauty because he trusted everyone to admire the roses and ignore the vase. "Yes," she said, "but it will be boring." Rocco turned to his men. "Take him downstairs." Julian began talking fast then. Names, routes, percentages, excuses. None of it mattered to Mara. Men always became storytellers when consequences entered the room. She bent slowly and began picking up the larger ceramic pieces because broken things on a floor bothered her, even during criminal collapse. Rocco crouched across from her. That was when the room truly froze. A mafia boss in a private casino, kneeling on expensive carpet among wet roses and stolen diamonds, helping a fat night cleaner pick up broken vase pieces. "You do not have to do that," Mara said. "Neither do you." "I actually do. Someone will step on it." He picked up a shard and placed it in the trash bin she had dragged over. "Then I am assisting. You're very strange for a terrifying man." "So I have been told." "By people still alive?" "Some." She laughed before she could stop herself. It came out tired and surprised, and for a second the casino felt less like a place built from secrets and more like a room where something honest had slipped through the velvet. By dawn, Julian's office had been emptied, the florist truck seized, the accounts frozen, and the names of 3 outside partners pulled from the hidden ledger. Rocco's men moved with quiet efficiency. No shouting, no wasted motion. The casino staff whispered in corners and looked at Mara differently now. Not kindly, not exactly, but carefully. Careful was a start. Rocco brought her back to his office above the casino, as pale morning light touched the windows. The city below looked washed and innocent, which Mara found rude of it. She sat in a leather chair that probably had opinions about her cheap cardigan and accepted coffee, because refusing would have required more strength than she had left. Rocco placed a folder on the desk. Mara looked at it. "If that is another invitation, I'm going to need thicker shoes." "It is your contract." "My what?" "Private audit consultant. Valenti Holdings. Legal division can make the title less suspicious. Private audit consultant sounds suspicious already. You preferred cleaner?" She touched the coffee cup but did not drink. "Cleaner is honest. Cleaner is what people used to call you when they wanted to ignore what you saw." That landed too close. Rocco opened the folder and slid a check across the desk. Mara looked down. $60,000. Made out to Mara Bell. Tax documents attached. Clean. Real. Heavy in a way paper should not be. Her throat tightened. "I told you," Rocco said. "You earned it." Mara did not touch the check at first. She looked at the number until it blurred a little. There were many kinds of crying. Loud crying, ugly crying, bathroom crying, funeral crying, quiet tears that escaped before pride could lock the door. Mara swallowed until the tears went back where they belonged. "This much money changes things," she said. "Yes, not always kindly." "No." She looked at him then. "And the phone?" Rocco took the black phone from his desk and placed it beside the check. "That is separate. It never is with men like you." His eyes remained steady. "You may walk away." "I know. Do you?" Mara thought of her apartment, her aching knees, the rent paid for 1 more month, the bus stop at night, the way people had looked through her for years and then suddenly looked at her like she was useful enough to fear. She thought of $60,000 and a clean contract. She thought of Rocco kneeling on the carpet, picking up broken vase pieces because someone might step on them. She thought of the fact that power in his hands was still power, even when it behaved politely. Then she thought of the old roulette table. The hidden strip had not opened because she forced it. It opened because she found where time had sealed it shut and pressed in the right place. Maybe lives were like that too. I know, she said. That is what makes it dangerous. Rocco nodded once, as if he respected the answer more because it did not flatter him. I will call when something does not add up. And if I do not answer? Then I wait. Men like you hate waiting. I am learning. Mara picked up the check, then the phone. The phone felt heavier. She stood carefully. Rocco stood too, but he did not move toward her. That mattered. She hated that it mattered. At the door, Mara paused and looked back. I am not yours. No, Rocco said. You are not. And I am not one of your men. No. And if anyone laughs at me before I finish explaining again, I'm charging extra. There it was again, that almost smile, brief and quiet, and strangely human. Put it in the contract. Mara left through the service exit, because old habits did not vanish just because money entered the room. The hallway smelled like soap, coffee, and tired workers changing shifts. A young cleaner passed her pushing a cart, eyes down, shoulders rounded in the practiced shape of someone trying not to be noticed. Mara nearly told her to look up. Instead, she held the door open for her. Outside, dawn had softened the city. The sky was pale silver. Trucks moved along the curb. Somewhere, bread was being delivered. Somewhere, rich men were waking to clean sheets and problems other people had spent the night solving. Mara stood on the sidewalk with no mop in her hand, a check large enough to change her life in her purse, and a black phone in her pocket that tied her to the most dangerous man in the city. For the first time in years, she could go anywhere. For the first time in years, she was not invisible. The phone buzzed once before she reached the corner. Mara stopped beneath the streetlight, took it out, and looked at the screen. One message waited from Rocco Valenti. Breakfast? She stared at it for a long moment. Then she looked back at the service door, at the casino hidden behind velvet and gold, at the city that had spent years teaching her to survive by noticing what everyone else ignored. Mara typed with one thumb. Only if you're paying, and no flowers. The reply came almost immediately. Agreed. Mara slipped the phone back into her pocket and walked into the morning. Not quickly, because her knees still hurt, and miracles did not fix everything. But she walked differently now, not like a woman leaving work, not like a woman running from rent, or shame, or men who thought the world belonged to them because no one had proved otherwise. She walked like someone who had found the hidden seam. And somewhere high above the waking city, Rocco Valenti looked at a message on his phone and understood that for all his money, men, keys, and locked rooms, the most valuable thing he had found in 2 nights was not inside his father's roulette table, or Julian Cross's stolen vases, or any vault built by careful hands. It was a woman everyone had mistaken for furniture, a woman who read dirt like confession, a woman who could not be bought with fear, a woman who had opened one secret compartment and, without meaning to, opened a door in his world that would never fully close again. The night Claire Whitman saved Matteo Reyes, the sky over Miami looked like it was being torn open by God's own hands. Wind screamed over the black water near the old marina, bending palm trees so low their wet fronds scraped the roofs of parked cars. Rain came down in hard silver sheets, flooding the cracked road, filling the gutters, and turning every streetlight into a blurry yellow ghost. Most people had already gone inside, locked their doors, and waited for the hurricane to pass. But Claire had nowhere inside to go. Her home was an old blue van with a dead radio, a cracked windshield, and a back door that only stayed shut because she tied it closed with a piece of orange rope. She had parked behind a closed bait shop near the marina because the building blocked some of the wind, and because nobody usually bothered her there. That was the rule Claire had learned over the past year. Stay where people did not look too closely. Stay quiet. Keep your things packed in case someone told you to move. Smile when a manager handed you cash for cleaning grease traps after closing. Say thank you when a diner cook wrapped up leftovers nobody else wanted. Never explain too much. Never let anyone hear how tired you were. And above all, never let anyone see you cry, because people already thought they knew everything about a fat white woman in worn sneakers, a stretched-out hoodie, and a van that smelled faintly of rain, gasoline, and old laundry. Claire was 28 years old, though some mornings she felt much older. Once, not even that long ago, She had worn clean scrubs and carried nursing textbooks in a canvas bag with little flowers printed on it. She had known the names of bones, medications, and muscles. She had practiced taking blood pressure on classmates who laughed when the cuff got too tight. She had believed, with a stubborn kind of hope, that if she worked hard enough, she could build a life steady enough to hold her. Then her father died. The bills came first, then the calls, then the quiet looks from people who did not know what to say. Her stepmother had promised they would manage everything together, but promises were easy when someone else's name was on the debt. Little by little, Claire's savings disappeared. Her tuition money vanished. Then came the car repairs, the late rent, the boxes packed in a hurry, and the shame that followed her like a shadow she could not shake. By the time she reached Miami, she had stopped telling people she had once wanted to become a nurse. It hurt less to let them think she had never wanted anything at all. She washed towels at a motel for cash. She wiped counters at gas stations. She picked up morning shifts at diners where customers looked past her when they wanted more coffee, as if her body took up space, but her soul did not. Sometimes men laughed too loud when she passed. Sometimes women glanced at her clothes and quickly looked away, as if poverty might spread through eye contact. Claire learned to keep her face calm. She learned to move through the world like a person trying not to make waves, even though deep inside her, there was still something alive and bright and unwilling to go out. That night, the hurricane shook the van so hard the whole frame groaned. Claire sat in the back with a flashlight between her knees, wrapping an old towel around the places where rain leaked through the roof. Her hair was damp and stuck to her cheeks. Her hands were cold, but she barely noticed. She was more worried about the water rising around the tires. If the road flooded too much, the van might stall for good, and then she would lose the last thing that belonged to her. She leaned toward the front seat, peered through the rain-blurred windshield, and tried to decide whether she should move farther up the road before the storm got worse. That was when she saw the black car. It came out of the rain like something thrown by the storm itself, long and low and shining even beneath the mud-colored water spraying from its tires. It was the kind of car Claire only saw outside hotels, where men in suits stepped out without looking at the people holding umbrellas for them. Its headlights cut wildly through the downpour as it flew along the flooded road beside the marina. For one strange second, Claire thought the driver had lost control because of the water. Then another car appeared behind it, dark, fast, too close. Its window rolled down just enough for a hand to come out. The first gunshot cracked across the storm. Claire froze. For a moment, her mind refused to understand the sound. It was too sharp, too wrong against the roar of rain. Then came another shot, and another. The black car swerved hard, its back end sliding across the road. A streetlight flashed over the windshield, and Claire saw the driver slump sideways. The car hit a barrier with a horrible metal scream, tore through the weakened rail, and dropped nose first into the marina water. The splash was so huge it swallowed the car almost whole. Claire did not move. The world seemed to narrow to the place where the car had vanished. Rain hammered the roof of the van. Wind shoved against the doors. Somewhere nearby, someone shouted, and then a door slammed. The second car slowed for half a breath, just long enough for Claire to see two shapes inside. Then it sped away into the storm, tires hissing through water. People who had been hiding under the awning of a closed seafood place scattered in every direction. Nobody ran toward the marina. Nobody even looked like they might. Claire's hand found the door handle before her fear could stop her. She stepped out into water that rushed over her ankles and nearly knocked her sideways. The wind slapped rain into her eyes so hard it stung. Her hoodie soaked through in seconds, growing heavy against her body. She heard herself breathing, rough and frightened, but beneath that fear came another sound from memory. Her nursing instructor's voice, calm and firm, telling the class that when someone was dying, the body did not care whether you were ready. You moved first. You panicked later. The black car was sinking near the broken dock, its front end already under, its rear lights glowing red beneath the churning water, like two dying coals. Claire ran as hard as she could, slipping once on the flooded pavement and catching herself with both hands. A piece of broken rail cut her palm. She ignored it. When she reached the edge, the water below was dark and violent, full of floating wood, twisted rope, trash, and white foam. The car shifted lower. Claire looked around one last time, hoping someone else would come. Someone stronger, someone trained, someone brave in the way people in movies were brave. But there was only rain, wind, and shadows behind windows, so Claire jumped. The water hit her like a wall of ice and oil. It closed over her head, filled her ears, and pulled at her clothes. For one terrible second she could not tell which way was up. She kicked hard, broke the surface, gasped, and tasted salt and gasoline. The current shoved her away from the car, but she fought back, grabbing a loose rope that slapped against the dock, and using it to drag herself closer. Her arms burned almost immediately. Her shoes felt like bricks. Something struck her thigh beneath the water, sharp enough to make her cry out, but she kept going. When she reached the car, she saw him. He was trapped behind the driver's window, his head tilted forward, blood darkening one side of his face. He was a large man, broad through the shoulders, dressed in a white shirt that looked almost silver under the water. His eyes were closed. The car kept sinking inch by inch, and the water had climbed to his chest inside. "No," Claire gasped, though the storm tore the word away. She grabbed the handle, but the door would not open. She pulled again, harder, planting her feet against the side of the car as best she could, but the pressure held it shut. Her chest tightened. The water rose higher inside. She looked around wildly and saw a bent piece of metal floating near the broken barrier, half caught in a line of rope. Claire stretched for it, missed, then lunged again and caught it with her injured hand. Pain flashed through her palm, bright and hot, but she barely felt it. She slammed the metal into the window. Nothing happened. She hit it again, and again. The sound was dull beneath the storm, a helpless knocking against thick glass. For one small, awful moment, Claire thought she was not strong enough. She thought of every person who had looked at her body and seen only something to mock, something too much, something slow and heavy and wrong. Then anger rose through her fear, clean and sudden. This body had carried laundry baskets up motel stairs. This body had stood 10 hours behind a counter. This body had slept folded in a van and still gotten up the next morning. This body had survived. Claire screamed into the rain and swung with everything she had. The glass cracked. She hit the same place again, and the window gave way in a burst of dark glitter. Water rushed into the car. Claire dropped the metal, reached through the broken window, and felt around for the seatbelt. Her fingers slipped twice before she found the release. The man's body shifted toward her, heavy and limp. For a second, his face slipped beneath the rising water. Claire grabbed his shirt with both hands and pulled. He did not move. "Come on," she sobbed. "Come on, please." She braced one foot against the car and yanked again, using her back, her legs, every tired part of herself. The man came through the window slowly, his shoulder catching on the broken frame. Claire felt glass scrape her arm. She twisted him free and nearly went under with him when his weight hit the water. He was heavier than anything she had ever carried, and he was not helping her at all. His head rolled back. Rain fell on his face. Blood washed from his hairline in thin red streams. Claire looped one arm under his chin the way she remembered from a water rescue video they had shown in class years ago. She kicked toward the dock, but the current pulled them sideways. The broken marina groaned above her. Her lungs burned. Twice, water slapped into her mouth, and she coughed so hard she almost lost her grip. But each time her fingers slipped, she tightened them again. She did not know this man. She did not know if he was good or bad, rich or cruel, loved or hated. She only knew his heart might still be beating, and that was enough. By the time she reached the ladder, Claire could barely feel her arms. She hooked her elbow around the lowest rung and dragged the man close, pressing his chest against the side of the dock. For a moment, she did not know how she would get him out. He hung there between water and wood, limp and impossible, while the storm tried to pull him back. Claire climbed onto the ladder, half-slipped, caught herself, then grabbed him under both arms. She pulled until her vision went white at the edges. Inch by inch, with a sound that came from somewhere deeper than pain, she hauled him over the dock and onto the wet boards. He lay on his back, still as stone. Claire crawled beside him and pressed trembling fingers to his neck. Nothing. Or maybe something. She could not tell. Her mind went strangely clear. She tilted his head, checked his mouth, and began CPR. Her hands found the center of his chest. She pushed down hard, counting under her breath, though the numbers disappeared inside the wind. The rain soaked both of them. The boards rocked beneath her knees. Somewhere in the distance, a siren began to wail. "Breathe," she begged him. "Please breathe." She gave him air, then pushed again. His ribs shifted under her palms. He did not wake. She kept going. Her arms shook. Her palm bled onto his shirt. She thought of her father in the hospital bed, the machines, the helplessness, the cruel quiet after the doctors stopped moving quickly. She had not been able to save him. She had not been able to save her own life from falling apart after he was gone. But this man was here, beneath her hands, and his story was not finished if she had anything to do with it. At last his body jerked. He coughed hard, water spilling from his mouth as he rolled slightly to the side. Claire almost collapsed from relief. She helped turn his head and kept one hand on his shoulder as he dragged in a broken, terrible breath. Then another. His eyes opened. They were dark eyes. Not soft, not confused in the way she expected. Even half drowned and bleeding, the man looked at her with a sharp, dangerous focus, as if some part of him had returned from the edge already searching for the person who had pushed him there. Claire pulled back without meaning to. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The sirens grew louder. The man's lips moved, but no sound came out at first. His hand lifted weakly and closed around her wrist. His fingers were cold, but his grip still carried command, like he was used to the world stopping when he wanted answers. Claire looked down at that hand, then at the flashing red lights beginning to smear through the rain at the far end of the road. Fear rushed back into her all at once. Police meant questions. Questions meant names. Names meant people finding out where she slept, what she had lost, how little she had left. Maybe they would help. Maybe they would not. Claire had learned not to trust maybes. She gently pulled her wrist free. The man tried to hold on, but he was too weak. His eyes narrowed, not with anger exactly, but with the fierce frustration of a man who was not used to being left behind. "I'm sorry," Claire whispered. Then she grabbed her soaked jacket from the dock, stumbled to her feet, and ran. She ran through the rain without looking back, past the broken barrier, past the closed bait shop, past the people now peering from safe places because the worst had already happened. Her lungs ached. Her leg throbbed where something had cut it in the water. She reached the van, climbed inside, and slammed the door with shaking hands. For a moment, she sat frozen behind the wheel, drenched and bleeding, watching the marina through the trembling curtain of rain. 2 patrol cars and an ambulance stopped near the dock. Men rushed toward the stranger she had pulled from the water. Claire could still see him faintly between moving bodies and flashing lights. He was sitting up now, or trying to. Someone wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. Even from that distance, even through the storm, Claire felt the weight of him looking around, looking for her. She turned the key. The van coughed, sputtered, and for one horrible second refused to start. Claire closed her eyes. "Please," she whispered, though she did not know who she was asking. The engine caught with a rough growl. She pulled away slowly at first, then faster, the tires pushing through floodwater as the marina disappeared behind her. By morning, the storm had weakened, but Miami looked bruised and half awake. Palm branches lay across the roads. Stoplights blinked uselessly. Water stood in parking lots like dull mirrors. Claire parked behind a laundromat that had lost power and changed out of her wet clothes in the back of the van, her whole body aching as if the hurricane had passed through her bones. She cleaned the cut on her palm with bottled water and wrapped it in a strip torn from an old t-shirt. Her leg was bruised, her throat hurt from swallowing dirty water, and her chest felt hollow from fear. She told herself she had done a good thing. That was all. A man had been dying, and she had helped him. She did not need to know his name. She did not need him to know hers. People like him had hospitals, lawyers, clean beds, and families who would arrive with dry clothes and worried faces. People like Claire had to keep moving, but the city did not forget what happened that night. By noon, the story was already moving in pieces. A powerful man had survived an attack near the marina. A car had gone into the water. Someone had pulled him out, but nobody knew who. At a gas station where Claire cleaned muddy footprints from the floor for $20 and a breakfast sandwich, 2 men near the coffee machine whispered about it. One said the man was Matteo Reyes. The other went quiet so fast it made Claire look up. She had heard that name before, though never from anyone who said it loudly. Matteo Reyes was the kind of name that lived under other words. Club owners mentioned him with lowered voices. Dock workers stopped talking when strangers came close. A cook at a diner once told another man that if Reyes wanted a street empty, even the rats would find somewhere else to go. Claire had thought it was just Miami talk, the kind of story people told to make dangerous men sound larger than life. But now, standing with a mop in her hand and a bandage wrapped around her palm, she felt a cold little thread pulled tight inside her. She had not saved just any man. She had saved a man people were afraid to name. For 3 days, Claire tried to disappear deeper into her own small life. She moved the van twice. She took a laundry shift under the table. She bought cheap soup and ate it cold in the parking lot behind a grocery store after closing. Every time a black car passed too slowly, her stomach tightened. Every time a man in a suit stepped into a place where she was working, she turned her face away. She told herself she was being foolish. Men like Matteo Reyes did not go searching for women like her. He had probably forgotten her the moment real doctors arrived. Rich men did not remember hands that pulled them from water unless those hands belonged to someone beautiful enough to tell stories about. On the 3rd night, Claire was asleep in the back of the van with one shoe still on when someone knocked on the window. Her eyes opened instantly. At first she saw only shapes through the glass. Large shoulders, dark jackets, rainwater still dripping from the roof above them, even though the storm had passed long ago. Claire pushed herself up so fast, her head hit the low ceiling. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Another knock came, softer this time, but somehow worse because it sounded patient, certain. "Claire Whitman," a man's voice said from outside. "We are not here to hurt you." That did not make her feel better. Nobody who came to hurt you ever started with the truth. She grabbed the small tire iron she kept near her blanket and crawled toward the front seat. But another man was already standing near the driver's door, not touching it, just waiting. Claire looked through the windshield and saw a black SUV parked behind her van, clean and expensive and completely out of place beside the closed grocery store dumpsters. Her breath turned shallow. The first man stepped back from the window and lifted both hands where she could see them. "Mr. Reyes wants to speak with you." Claire's fingers tightened around the tire iron. In that moment, every hard lesson she had learned told her to run. But the van was blocked in, her body was sore, and the men outside looked like they knew exactly how far she could get. She thought of the dark eyes opening on the dock. She thought of the hand closing around her wrist. She thought of the sirens, the gunshots, and the car vanishing beneath black water. Then she thought of the way everyone else had run. Claire swallowed and opened the door. The warm Miami night rushed in, smelling of wet asphalt, salt, and fear she did not want them to see. She climbed out slowly, keeping the tire iron at her side. The men noticed it but did not laugh. That frightened her more than laughter would have. "I don't know anything," she said, and hated how small her voice sounded. "I didn't see who shot at him. I don't want money, I don't want trouble. I just pulled him out." The first man looked at her with a kind of careful respect that made her feel even more unsteady. "He knows. Then why are you here?" The man glanced toward the SUV. "Because Matteo Reyes does not forget a debt." Claire looked at the blocked van, the dark grocery store, the empty parking lot, and the strangers waiting beneath the yellow security lights. Somewhere far away, beyond the buildings, the ocean moved in the dark, as if it knew secrets people had not yet spoken. Claire had spent a year being invisible, and now the most dangerous man in Miami had found her. For one breath, she almost wished she had stayed hidden in the rain. Then the SUV door opened, and Claire understood, with a soft and terrible certainty, that the hurricane had not ended when the sky cleared. It had only changed direction. For a moment, nobody moved. The black SUV sat in the wet parking lot, like a shadow that had learned how to breathe, its open door waiting with a silence that felt more frightening than any threat. Claire stood beside her old van with the tire iron still in her hand, her damp hair falling around her face, her heart beating so hard it seemed to shake her whole body. She had spent so long being ignored that being found felt almost like being hunted. The man beside the SUV did not rush her. He only held the door and watched with a calm patience that told her he already knew she had nowhere to run. Claire looked back at her van. The side door was dented. A grocery bag of clothes sat on the passenger seat. A half-empty bottle of water rolled slowly across the floor every time the wind pushed against the frame. That van was ugly, broken, and cold at night, but it was hers. It was the last place in the world where she still had some control. Getting into that SUV meant stepping into a world she did not understand. A world of men with quiet voices and clean shoes who knew her full name before she had ever given it to them. "I said I don't want anything," she told them. The first man nodded once. "He believes you. Then tell him thank you for believing me, and leave me alone." The man's face did not change. He tried. For 3 days. He did not like how that felt. Claire gave a short, nervous laugh, though nothing about it was funny. "So he sends men to a parking lot in the middle of the night? He sent us because he thought coming himself might scare you more." Claire almost laughed again at that, but the sound died in her throat, because somehow the thought of Matteo Reyes coming alone to her van was worse. She remembered those dark eyes opening on the dock, sharp even through pain, as if death itself had annoyed him by getting too close. A man like that did not need to raise his voice to make the air shift around him. The man at the SUV lowered his voice. "You saved his life. He wants to make sure you are safe." "I'm safe enough." The man's eyes moved over the van. The broken window seal, the rope on the back door, the towel pushed along the dashboard to catch leaks. He did not say what he was thinking, and for that, Claire hated him a little less. "You can bring your things," he said. Claire looked at the SUV again, then at the empty road beyond the grocery store. The city was quiet after the storm, but not peaceful. Broken branches lay against the curb. A loose sign creaked above the dark storefront. Somewhere behind the building, water dripped from a roof into a metal bin, again and again, steady as a clock. Claire knew fear. She had lived with it in small forms for a long time. Fear of a knock on the van, fear of a shift ending early, fear of getting sick, fear of being recognized by someone from the life she had lost. But this was different. This fear wore polished shoes and spoke politely. She climbed back into the van and packed the few things that mattered. A backpack with clothes, her father's old watch, which no longer worked but still felt warm when she held it, a worn nursing textbook she could never make herself throw away, a plastic bag with a toothbrush, soap, and half a roll of bandages. When she stepped out again, the tire iron was no longer in her hand, but her shoulders stayed tight. One of the men reached for the backpack, and Claire pulled it closer. "I've got it," she said. He stepped back immediately. That small act did more to convince her than all their careful words. She got into the SUV and sat near the door, leaving as much space as possible between herself and the man beside her. The leather seat was soft beneath her body. Too soft, too clean, too expensive. She became suddenly aware of the mud on her shoes and the smell of damp clothes in her backpack. The driver pulled out of the parking lot, and Claire watched her van shrink in the rear window until it disappeared behind the grocery store. They drove through Miami, while the city slowly repaired itself around them. Crews were clearing branches from the streets. Windows were boarded. Floodwater still covered corners where the drains had failed. Farther east, the houses grew larger and quieter. Gates appeared. Trees were trimmed into shapes that had never had to fight for sunlight. Claire pressed her hand against her bandaged palm and tried not to imagine all the ways this could go wrong. When the SUV turned through tall black gates beside Biscayne Bay, Claire stopped breathing for a second. The house beyond them did not look like a house. It looked like a hotel built for one person. Pale stone walls glowed under soft outdoor lights. Tall windows reflected the dark ocean beyond the lawn. Men stood near the entrance, not crowded together, not showing off, simply placed there like part of the architecture. Claire had cleaned hotel lobbies less expensive than this driveway. The SUV stopped. The door opened. Warm air touched her face, carrying the smell of salt, wet flowers, and something faintly sweet from inside the house. Claire stepped out carefully, holding her backpack in front of her like a shield. Her sneakers squeaked on the smooth stone walkway. Every man near the door looked at her, then looked away, not dismissing her exactly, but making room for her, in a way she was not used to. Inside, the house was quiet. Marble floors, white walls, a wide staircase curving upward, ocean-black windows stretching almost to the ceiling. Claire had spent the past year using public restrooms to wash her face and sleeping with one eye open in parking lots, and now she stood under a chandelier that looked like frozen rain. She felt too big, too dirty, too visible. Her first instinct was to apologize for standing there. Then he appeared. Matteo Reyes came down the stairs slowly, one hand resting on the rail. He wore dark pants and a white shirt open at the throat. A bandage crossed one side of his forehead, and there was a shadow of bruising along his jaw. He should have looked weakened by what had happened. Instead, he looked like a storm that had briefly been knocked to its knees and had risen angrier for the insult. Claire's fingers tightened around her backpack strap. Matteo stopped several steps above her. He did not smile. He did not perform gratitude. He looked at her with the same dark focus she remembered from the dock, only now there was something else in it. Recognition. Not of her name, or her story, or the shape of her body under tired clothes, but of the simple fact that she was the person who had reached into the water when everyone else had stepped back. "Claire Whitman," he said. His voice was low and rough, like it had been dragged across gravel. Claire lifted her chin. "You found me." "I did. I didn't ask to be found." "No," he said, "but I needed to look." She expected him to move closer, to tower over her, to make the room feel smaller. He did none of that. He stayed where he was, leaving space between them, as if he understood that every step mattered. "You saved my life," he said. Claire looked away first. "I did CPR, that's all. You broke a car window in a hurricane and pulled me out of the water. You were drowning. A lot of people saw that." Her throat tightened. She had no answer for that. Matteo came down the last few steps, stopping several feet away from her. Up close, she saw the tiredness beneath the control, the faint redness in his eyes, the stiffness in the way he held his side. He was not made of stone after all. He bled. He hurt. He had almost died. "I owe you a debt," he said. "I don't want your money. I know. You don't know anything about me. I know you ran before anyone could thank you. I know you sleep in a van that should not be on the road. I know your hand is injured. I know you worked 2 shifts yesterday anyway." His jaw tightened slightly. "I know enough to understand pride when I see it." Claire felt heat rise in her face. "You had me followed? I had you found." That sounds nicer, but it's the same thing. For the first time, something almost like a smile touched his mouth. It was small and gone quickly, but it changed his whole face for half a second. Maybe. Claire should have been more afraid than she was. She was afraid, of course. Only a fool would stand in that house with armed men nearby and not feel fear. But there was something strange about Matteo's attention. It did not slide over her or around her. It did not pause with disgust or pity on the shape of her body. It rested on her as if she were a person standing in front of him, complete and real. Claire was so unused to that kind of looking that it almost hurt. He turned slightly and gestured toward the hallway. "There is a room prepared for you. A doctor is waiting to check your hand and your leg. There is food if you want it, clean clothes, cash if you choose to take it." "I told you I don't want to be bought." Matteo's eyes darkened. "I am not buying you." "Then what is this?" He was quiet for a moment. Somewhere deeper in the house, the ocean wind pressed softly against the windows. "This is a man who woke up with rain in his lungs and your face above him," he said. "This is that man trying to understand why the only person brave enough to save him was living in a van behind a grocery store." Claire swallowed hard. She hated that those words reached places in her she had kept carefully locked. "You don't get to fix me because I helped you." "No," Matteo said. "I don't." That answer stopped her. He stepped aside then, not toward her, but away, opening the path deeper into the house. "You can leave whenever you want," he said. "No one will stop you, but until you do, you will be fed. You will be treated. You will sleep behind locked doors that are there to protect you, not trap you." Claire wanted to refuse. She wanted to walk back out, find her van, and disappear before this strange, polished world swallowed her, but her body ached. Her hand throbbed. Her stomach had been empty since noon. And beneath all that, beneath the fear and pride, was a tiredness so deep it felt endless. So she followed. The guest room was larger than the whole apartment she had shared with her father years ago. It had soft lamps, pale curtains, a bed covered in white blankets, and a bathroom with towels folded like they belonged in a magazine. Claire stood in the doorway, unable to move. The doctor cleaned her cuts and said she was lucky the wound on her leg was not worse. A woman named Rosa brought soup, bread, and clothes in her size without making a big deal out of it. That almost made Claire cry more than anything. The clothes were not tiny things she would have to squeeze into with shame. They were soft, loose, clean, and chosen as if her body had been expected rather than regretted. That night, Claire slept in a real bed, for the first time in months. At first she could not relax. Every sound made her eyes open. A footstep in the hall, Wind against the glass. A quiet voice downstairs. But the door stayed closed. No one came in. No one asked her to explain why she had failed at becoming the girl her father once believed in. Eventually, sleep took her so gently, she did not feel herself falling. The days that followed were strange and slow. Claire told herself she would leave as soon as her hand healed, but every morning there was breakfast waiting, and no one asking her to earn it. Matteo did not force conversation. Sometimes she saw him on the terrace speaking in Spanish, to men with serious faces. Sometimes she passed his office and heard his voice turn cold enough to make the hallway feel different. But with her, he stayed careful. He asked if she had eaten. He asked if the doctor had changed her bandage. He asked nothing else unless she offered it. It was Claire who finally told him about her father. They were sitting outside one evening after rain had washed the heat from the air. The bay was dark and calm, holding the city lights in broken pieces. Matteo had a cup of coffee in front of him, untouched. Claire had wrapped both hands around a mug of tea, mostly for something to hold. "He used to say I had good hands," she said softly. Matteo looked at her. "My dad, when I was in school, he said nurses needed good hands because people could feel whether you were scared of touching them." She stared down into the tea. "After he died, everything fell apart so fast, I couldn't even understand it while it was happening. My stepmother said she was handling the money. Then one day there was no money, no house, no school, just bills with my name on them, and a woman telling me I was old enough to figure myself out." Matteo listened without interrupting. That was one of the first things Claire noticed about him. He did not rush to make the story easier for himself. He let the silence hold the ugly parts. "I was embarrassed," Claire said. "That's the stupidest part. I was more ashamed of people knowing I had nothing than I was scared of having nothing. So I left. I thought I'd find work, save money, go back to school. Then 1 week became a month, then a year." She laughed once, but it had no joy in it. People think when you disappear, there's some big dramatic reason. Sometimes you just get tired of being seen while you're falling. Matteo's face shifted slightly, something hard moving behind his eyes. "I understand that more than you think." Claire looked at him then. He told her about his uncle on another night, not all at once, but in pieces. The Reyes family had not always belonged to him. His father had built part of it, his uncle had wanted all of it, and Matteo had been young enough once to believe blood still meant loyalty. The attack at the marina had not been the first attempt on his life. Years before, his uncle had tried to hand him over to enemies during a business meeting. Matteo survived, but something in him had closed forever after that. He learned that fear kept men honest longer than love did. He built walls out of money, violence, silence, and rules no one dared break. He became the kind of man others whispered about, because whispering was safer than saying his name. "And did it help?" Claire asked him. Matteo looked toward the water. "It kept me alive." "That's not what I asked." He turned back to her, and for a moment, he looked almost tired. "No," he said. "It did not help." That was how it began between them. Not with flowers, not with sweet promises, with two people sitting near dark water, telling the truth in small pieces because the whole truth was too heavy to lift at once. Claire learned he hated sleeping with his back to a door. Matteo learned she kept her nursing book under her pillow like a secret she was not ready to call a dream. Claire learned he liked old Cuban music, but rarely played it because it reminded him of his mother. Matteo learned she loved oranges, strong coffee, and quiet mornings before anyone expected her to smile. He gave her space. She gave him honesty. Neither of them knew what to do with that. The first time Claire laughed in his house, Matteo looked so startled that she laughed harder. It happened over dinner when he tried to compliment Rosa's cooking and accidentally insulted the peppers because his Spanish moved faster than his patience. Rosa scolded him from the kitchen, and Claire covered her mouth, but the laugh escaped anyway. Matteo looked at her as if the sound had entered a room in him that had been locked for years. After that, something softened, not in the world around him. That world remained sharp. Men still came with bad news. Phone calls still made his face harden. Guards still stood at the gates. But with Claire, Matteo began to change in ways so small only someone used to watching from the edges would notice. He stopped pretending he was fine, when pain from his healing ribs made him pause. He asked her opinion and did not laugh when she gave it. He let her sit across from him in his office while she read from her nursing textbook, the two of them quiet but not lonely. Then Isabella Vargas came to the house. Claire knew who she was before anyone said her name. Some women entered a room like they belonged there. Isabella entered like everyone else had been placed there for her. She was tall, polished, and beautiful, in a way that looked expensive from across the hall. Her dress was white, her diamonds were quiet, and her smile did not reach her eyes when she saw Claire standing near the staircase. "So this is her," Isabella said. Matteo's voice became flat. "Careful." Isabella's smile sharpened. "I was only curious. People are talking, Matteo. They say the great Matteo Reyes nearly drowned and came home with a stray." Claire felt the words hit, but she did not lower her eyes. That alone seemed to irritate Isabella. "I'm Claire," she said. "I know what your name is. Then use it." The room went very still. For half a second, Matteo looked at Claire with something dangerously close to pride. Isabella noticed, and the humiliation on her face flashed hot before she buried it under elegance. Later, Claire found out the truth. Isabella was not Matteo's wife. Not officially, but the world around them had already planned it. Her family had power across borders, money tied to men Matteo did not trust, and a marriage between them would keep certain wars quiet. It was not love. It was an arrangement written in fear, pride, and business. Claire listened to Matteo explain it in the garden after Isabella left, and every word made her feel colder. "So where do I fit in that arrangement?" Claire asked. Matteo stepped closer, but she moved back. "Claire. No, don't say my name like that. I'm not going to be hidden in some pretty room while you marry a woman who looks at me like I crawled out of a drain. I am not marrying her. Were you going to before?" His silence was answer enough. Claire nodded, fighting the sting in her eyes. "I saved your life. That doesn't mean I handed you mine." Matteo looked as if she had struck him, but Claire kept going, because stopping would hurt worse. "I have been pitied. I have been ignored. I have been used by people who thought I should be grateful for scraps. I will not be your secret. I will not be the woman you keep safe while another woman gets your name." Matteo's control cracked then, not loudly, not with anger, but with the quiet force of something he could no longer hold back. "Isabella means nothing to me. She means enough that everyone expects you to marry her. She is politics, and what am I?" He stepped closer again, slowly this time, giving her the chance to move away. She did not. "You are the face I saw when I came back from death," he said. "You are the woman who touched me without fear, when every person who wanted my power would have let me sink. You are the first person in years who speaks to me like I am still human. I do not know how to make that clean. I do not know how to make my world safe. But I know this, Claire. From the moment I opened my eyes on that dock, I could not forget you." Claire wanted those words not to matter. She wanted to be stronger than the part of herself that longed to be chosen without apology. But his voice was raw, and his eyes held no performance. He was not offering her a fairy tale. He was offering the truth, dangerous and unfinished. "You scare me," she whispered. "I scare myself sometimes." "That's not comforting." "I know." She looked at him for a long moment. Then Matteo lifted his hand, not to touch her yet, but to ask without words. Claire hated how much that mattered. She hated how gently he waited. She hated how her heart moved toward him, before her mind gave permission. When she kissed him, the whole world seemed to go quiet. For a short while after that, they lived inside something fragile and bright. Matteo ended the understanding with Isabella, though he knew it would bring consequences. Claire stayed, but not as a guest who hid from herself. She began studying again, first at the small desk in her room, then at the table near the terrace while Matteo worked nearby. He bought nothing for her without asking. She accepted help, slowly, carefully, the way someone steps into warm water after years of cold. Matteo laughed more. Not often, but enough that Rosa began pretending not to notice. Claire teased him for being dramatic about minor headaches while ignoring knife scars. He told her she had terrible taste in gas station coffee. She told him rich people had ruined coffee by making it too complicated. At night, when his dreams woke him, he no longer always reached for a weapon. Sometimes he reached for her hand, but the world outside their small peace had not forgiven them. Isabella did not accept humiliation. To her, Claire was not a person. She was an insult with a heartbeat. A woman with no money, no family name, no polished beauty, and no right, in Isabella's mind, to stand beside a man powerful families had already claimed. And Dante Morales, the rival who had ordered the Marina attack, understood jealousy as well as he understood violence. When Isabella gave him information about a charity gala at one of Matteo's hotels, Dante saw more than a chance to kill Matteo. He saw a way to prove that even feared men could be brought to their knees. The gala took place on a warm night under soft lights and glass chandeliers. The hotel ballroom overlooked the water, and every surface seemed to shine. Claire wore a deep green dress Rosa had helped her choose, one that fit her body instead of fighting it. She had stood in front of the mirror for a long time before leaving the house, waiting for shame to speak first. It did, because shame had an old voice. It told her to cover her arms, hide her stomach, turn sideways, be less. Then Matteo appeared in the doorway behind her. Silent for so long, she finally met his eyes in the mirror. "You look beautiful," he said. Claire almost looked away. "You don't have to say that." "I know." That was the difference. He did not sound kind. He sounded certain. At the gala, people stared. Some tried not to. Some failed. Claire felt every glance, but Matteo kept his hand lightly at her back, not steering her, not claiming ownership, only reminding her that she was not alone. For the first hour, nothing happened. There was music, soft laughter, expensive perfume, and speeches about generosity from men who had built fortunes by taking more than they gave. Claire stayed close to Matteo but watched the service doors, the staff, the quiet corners. Some part of her had survived too long by noticing what others missed. She saw the first gun before anyone screamed. A man in a waiter's jacket reached under a tray near the side hallway. Claire turned toward Matteo, but the room exploded into motion before she could speak. Glass shattered. People screamed. Men drew weapons from under suit jackets. Matteo pushed Claire behind him and moved with terrifying calm, his whole body becoming something trained and cold. He shouted orders, but the sound broke apart under panic. Claire was pulled away in the rush. One moment Matteo's hand was near hers. The next, bodies shoved between them, and someone grabbed her from behind. A hand, clamped over her mouth. She bit down hard, heard a man curse, and kicked backward, but another arm locked around her waist. They dragged her through the service hallway, while the ballroom roared behind them. Dante Morales was waiting near the kitchen entrance. Claire knew it had to be him, because fear moved differently around him. He was lean, smiling, and too calm for a man standing in chaos. He looked at Claire like she was a tool he had been pleased to find. "So this is the miracle woman," he said. "I expected something else." Claire breathed hard through her nose, refusing to give him tears. Dante leaned closer. "Do you know how funny this is? Matteo Reyes, the man nobody could touch, softened by a woman everyone else looked through." The man holding Claire pressed a gun against her side. Cold metal dug through the fabric of her dress. Matteo appeared at the end of the hallway a few seconds later, blood on his knuckles, fury in his face. He stopped when he saw the gun. Dante smiled wider. "Drop it." Matteo held his weapon at his side. His eyes moved to Claire. In that one look, she saw the whole war inside him. Rage, fear, calculation, love. The last one frightened her most, because it made him vulnerable in a way no bullet could. "Matteo," she said, her voice shaking. "It's okay," he told her. "It is not okay," Dante said softly. "That is the point." Matteo dropped the weapon. The sound of it hitting the floor echoed down the hallway. Dante laughed, almost delighted. There he is, a king on his knees without even kneeling. Claire looked at Matteo's empty hand, then at Dante's smile, then at the man holding her, whose grip had loosened slightly because he was watching his boss enjoy the moment. Something steady rose inside her. Not bravery exactly. Claire did not feel brave. She felt furious. Furious at being used as proof of weakness. Furious that men like this thought love only mattered when it could be turned into a weapon. Furious that her body, the same body strangers had mocked, was being held as if it belonged to someone else. So she used it. Claire threw all her weight backward with every bit of force she had. The man behind her was not ready. His breath burst out as she slammed into him, driving him hard into the metal shelving along the wall. The gun shifted away from her side. Claire grabbed his wrist with both hands and twisted down the way she had once learned in a self-defense class at the community center years ago. The gun went off, deafening in the narrow hall, but the shot hit the ceiling. Claire stomped on his foot, tore free, and grabbed the first thing her hand found from a broken service cart. A champagne bottle, shattered at the neck. She swung it at the man's arm when he lunged again. Not cleanly, not gracefully, but hard enough that he screamed and stumbled back. Matteo moved at the same instant. He crossed the hallway like a released blade. Dante turned, but not fast enough. The fight that followed was brutal and short and terrifying. Matteo took a hit that would have dropped another man, then drove Dante into the wall with a force that cracked framed glass. Claire backed away, still holding the broken bottle, shaking so hard she could barely stand. By the time Matteo's men reached the hall, Dante was on the floor, alive but beaten, his smile gone. Matteo turned to Claire. Everything dangerous in him vanished so quickly it almost hurt to see. He came toward her, then stopped, as if remembering not to crowd her. "Are you hit?" he asked. Claire looked down at herself, surprised not to find blood. "No." His breath shook. "Just once." "Claire!" The bottle slipped from her hand and shattered fully on the floor. Then she was in his arms, and he held her like the storm had returned, and he was refusing to let it take her twice. By morning, Isabella's betrayal was no longer a secret. Recorded calls, security footage, messages traced through men who folded quickly once Matteo's people found them. Her family denied her before the sun was fully up. That was the way power worked in their world. Love could be messy, but survival was clean. Isabella lost the protection she had mistaken for loyalty, and Matteo ended every arrangement tied to her name with a calm so final, no one asked twice. Dante disappeared into the kind of prison powerful men used when public courts were too slow, and the underworld learned a new truth. Claire Whitman was not a hidden embarrassment. She was not a weakness to be mocked. She was under Matteo Reyes's protection, yes, but that was not the whole story. The men who had seen the hallway footage whispered about the woman who had fought back with a broken bottle and knocked an armed man off balance with the body others had dared to laugh at. Matteo did not correct those stories. Claire did not need him to. But after the gala, Claire changed too. For days, she was quiet. Matteo thought it was fear at first, and part of it was. But another part was something stronger. She had almost died in his world, and surviving it made one thing clear. She could not let her whole life become a room in his house, no matter how beautiful that room was. She had been saved from the street, but being saved was not the same as living. One morning she found Matteo on the terrace and placed her nursing textbook on the table between them. "I want to finish," she said. He looked at the book, then at her. "Then you will. I don't mean with 10 bodyguards scaring everyone at the school." His mouth almost smiled. "Maybe 5. Matteo, 2. She tried to glare, but the corner of her mouth betrayed her. Then she grew serious again. "I also want to build something. Not someday, now. There are women sleeping in cars all over this city. Girls hiding in bathrooms. People who need stitches and antibiotics and someone to look at them without disgust. I know what that feels like. I can help." Matteo was silent for a long time. "Tell me what you need." Claire shook her head. "No, not like that. I don't want you to hand me a building and make it another Reyes property. I want support, not ownership. I want it to be mine." Matteo leaned back slowly, and she could see him fighting old instincts. He wanted to solve things by taking control. He wanted to protect by surrounding. He wanted to give by making it impossible for anyone to refuse. But he loved her enough now to understand that love, if held too tightly, could become another cage. "All right," he said, "yours." The shelter clinic opened 6 months later in a small renovated building near the same neighborhoods where Claire used to park when she needed a safe place to sleep. It had pale yellow walls, donated exam tables, clean blankets, a pantry, and a little room where children could sit with books while their mothers spoke to nurses. Claire finished her certification with tired eyes and a joy she barely knew how to carry. The first time someone called her Nurse Claire, she went into the supply closet and cried into a stack of paper towels. Matteo found her there and said nothing. He simply stood outside the door until she came out. The city began to know her differently, not as the woman Matteo Reyes loved, though people said that too. Not as the woman from the hurricane, though that story never fully disappeared. They knew her as the woman who kept the clinic doors open late when storms came. The woman who remembered which patients were scared of male doctors. The woman who kept extra socks, clean shirts and protein bars in the back office because she knew hunger could make pride sharper. Claire did not become polished in the way Isabella had been polished. She became steady. And that was far more powerful. Matteo changed more slowly. He did not become innocent. Claire never asked him to pretend he was. There were things in his past that could not be washed clean by love, and she knew better than to believe a kiss could turn blood into water. But he began cutting away the cruelest pieces of his empire. He moved money into hotels, security companies, shipping businesses that could stand in daylight. He closed certain routes, broke certain alliances. Men who had once profited from fear learned that Matteo's silence had become more dangerous than his anger. One night, after another long meeting, he found Claire on the balcony of the clinic, looking over the street where a woman and her little daughter were climbing into a shelter van. "I am trying," he said. Claire took his hand. "I know. For you." She turned to him then. "No, not for me." His brow tightened. "If you only change for me, then one day you'll resent me for the cost. Change because you are tired of being the man they made you become. Change because some part of you has wanted out longer than you knew." Matteo looked down at their joined hands. His thumb moved gently over her knuckles. "And if I do not know who I am without all of it, then you find out slowly." The next year passed that way, slowly, not perfectly, with arguments, fear, healing, and mornings that felt almost ordinary. Matteo still had enemies. Claire still had days when a cruel glance could bring back old shame before she had time to stop it. But now she had a life that belonged to her. She had work that mattered. She had a man who looked at her as if the world had made a terrible mistake by ever teaching her to hide. On the anniversary of the hurricane, Matteo drove her back to the marina. Claire knew where they were going before he said it. Her hands grew quiet in her lap as the road curved toward the water. The broken barrier had been replaced. The bait shop had new paint. The dock had been repaired, and small boats rocked gently in their slips beneath a soft orange sky. Nothing looked like that night except the water, and even that was calm now, shining under the last light of the day, as if it had never tried to swallow anyone. They walked to the end of the dock. Claire stood in the place where she had given him CPR, where rain had blinded her, where sirens had made her run. For a while, neither of them spoke. "I was angry when you left," Matteo said at last. Claire looked at him. "I know. I thought I needed your name, your story, some way to repay you." He stared out over the water. "But what I really wanted was proof, that you were real, that when I opened my eyes, I had not imagined the first person in years who looked at me and saw something worth saving." Claire's throat tightened. Matteo turned to her. The wind moved gently through his dark hair. "Everyone else saw a dying man in a sinking car, or they saw trouble, or danger. You saw a human being. You were one. I had forgotten." She shook her head softly. "No, you buried it." He smiled a little. "You always make the harder correction. Someone has to." Matteo reached into his jacket. Claire's breath caught before she understood why. Then he lowered himself to one knee on the dock, where she had once knelt beside his half-dead body, and the whole world seemed to hold still. "I have been feared," he said. "I have been obeyed. I have been betrayed, hunted, and followed. But I was never truly found until you pulled me out of that water." His voice roughened. "Claire Whitman, will you marry me? Not because I saved you, not because you saved me, but because the life I want now is the one where we keep choosing each other after the storm." Claire covered her mouth with both hands. For a second, she saw herself as she had been that night, soaked, shaking, bleeding, convinced she was nobody's miracle. Then she saw everything after: the room, the fear, the first dinner, the kiss, the clinic, the way Matteo had learned to loosen his grip so she could stand beside him freely. "Yes," she whispered. Matteo closed his eyes for one breath, as if the word had gone through him like light. Then he stood, and Claire laughed while crying as he slid the ring onto her finger, with hands that trembled just enough for her to notice. Their wedding came in spring, when Miami was warm but not cruel. It was held near the water, beneath white flowers and soft strings of lights, with Cuban music drifting through the air and southern food on long tables because Claire said her father would have liked that. Rosa cried before the ceremony even started. Matteo's men pretended not to. The clinic staff sat near the front, along with women Claire had helped who came dressed in their best clothes, some holding babies, some holding tissues, all of them smiling, like they were watching more than a wedding. Claire wore a gown made for her body, not against it. It did not try to hide her arms or shrink her waist or apologize for the space she filled. It moved around her like moonlight, soft and sure, and when she looked at herself in the mirror, she did not search first for what was wrong. She saw a woman who had crossed dirty water, grief, hunger, shame, and fear, and had arrived still whole. When Matteo saw her walking toward him, he cried, not loudly, not in a way many people would notice, but Claire saw it. She saw the tears in his eyes, the way his mouth tightened, the way the feared man of Miami looked at her, like every empire he had ever built was small beside this one impossible blessing. When she reached him, he took her hands, as if they were still the hands that had brought him back to life. 1 year later, Claire stood on the balcony of their Miami estate, as sunrise opened slowly over the ocean. The house behind her was quiet. Matteo was still asleep, one arm reaching across the empty side of the bed where she had been. The clinic would open in 2 hours. There would be appointments, supply problems, paperwork, and someone waiting by the side door who needed help but was afraid to ask. Claire would go, because she knew that fear. She knew the shape of it. She knew how heavy life could feel when the world looked away. But this morning, she let herself stand still. Below, the water shone gold beneath the first light. Somewhere beyond the gates, the city was waking. Claire touched the ring on her finger, then rested her hand over her heart. She was no longer sleeping in a van, no longer counting coins under a gas station light, no longer trying to make herself smaller so strangers would be kinder. She was Claire Reyes now, wife of a feared man, founder of a shelter clinic, nurse, survivor, and woman of her own making. Love had not found her when she was polished. It had not waited for her to become rich, thin, perfect, or easy for the world to admire. Love had found her in a hurricane, in dirty floodwater, with blood on her hand and fear in her chest. While she was saving a stranger everyone else was too afraid to touch. And in saving Matteo Reyes, Claire had not become someone new. She had finally found her way back to the brave woman she had been all along. No one in Emilio Caserta's world ever looked twice at the secretary outside his office, and that was exactly why she saw everything. Men with blood under their rings gave her their schedules. Lawyers with shaking hands gave her sealed envelopes. Capos who could silence a room with one look still lowered their voices when Velma Sykes asked them to wait. She was quiet, neat, soft-spoken, and almost invisible behind her polished desk at Caserta Global Imports, a company that moved wine, marble, silk, coffee, machine parts, and, when the lights were low enough, things no customs officer was paid enough to ask about. To the outside world, Emilio Caserta was a brilliant businessman. To the men who feared him, he was the calm center of a city-wide storm. And to Velma, he was the man whose coffee she prepared every morning, whose meetings she arranged with perfect timing, and whose dangerous empire she had learned to organize without ever letting her hand tremble. But on the morning her collar scraped against the dark bruise hidden on her neck, the woman who made monsters wait quietly in line finally became the one thing she had spent years trying not to be: noticed. The office sat high above the river, in a glass tower that looked cold even in sunlight. Every floor below belonged to normal companies with normal problems: payroll mistakes, late deliveries, nervous clients, bad coffee, tired assistants who dreamed of weekends. But the top floor belonged to Emilio Caserta, and the air there always felt different. It was quieter, heavier, polished until it shone. The carpets were thick enough to swallow footsteps. The doors were dark walnut and taller than they needed to be. Security cameras rested in the corners like patient eyes. Behind smoked glass walls, men spoke softly about ports, shipments, routes, debts, and names that disappeared from conversation the moment Velma entered the room. She had worked there for 3 years, long enough to know which smiles were fake, which handshakes meant war, and which men were trying to look braver than they felt. She knew that Emilio took his coffee black unless the meeting was going badly, in which case he did not touch it at all. She knew Carmine always wanted the chair nearest the door. She knew Rocco lied when he tapped his thumb against his wedding ring. She knew the office printer jammed every Thursday if someone tried to rush the customs packets. She knew more than anyone suspected, because no one expected a secretary to understand danger unless it arrived wearing her name. Velma liked being useful. Usefulness was clean. It had rules. A folder could be prepared, a signature could be gathered, a calendar could be corrected, a room full of violent men could be made to wait, one appointment at a time. She wore simple blouses, dark skirts, low heels, and soft cardigans in winter. Her hair was always pinned back, her makeup was always light, her voice was always calm. She had built herself into a woman no one needed to question. At home, she was not calm. Her apartment was small, dim, and too quiet when Ben Carter was not there. Too loud when he was. There were marks in the wall near the kitchen where a mug had shattered last spring. There was a crack in the bathroom mirror from the night he had punched beside her face instead of into it, then told her she should be grateful for his restraint. There were bills with his name circled in red, though her money paid most of them. There were flowers he had bought after the bad nights, cheap grocery store roses that always wilted before the apology did. Ben had not been cruel at first. That was the part Velma hated remembering. He had been charming in the easy, careless way of a man who knew how to make loneliness feel seen. He said she was steady. He said she made him feel safe. He said she was the only person who understood him. Then he slowly took the shape of her life in his hands and began closing his fingers. He wanted to know where she was, then who she spoke to, then why she wore that blouse, then why she smiled at the delivery man, then why she needed her own bank account. Every demand came dressed as love, until love started to feel like a locked door. The night before everything changed, Ben had been waiting in the living room when she came home late from work. The lights were off, except for the blue glow of the television. He had not asked about her day. He had asked why Emilio Caserta had called her after hours. Velma had tried to explain that it was business, only a scheduling correction for a shipment meeting. Ben had laughed, the kind of laugh that made her stomach fold in on itself. Then came the questions, then the accusations, then his hand around her arm, then the wall behind her shoulder, then pain blooming along her jaw, hot and white and shocking, though by then shock had become familiar. In the morning she moved carefully through the bathroom, one hand braced on the sink, breathing in shallow sips because her ribs screamed when she inhaled too deep. Her jaw was swollen along the left side, purple and yellow beneath the skin. Finger-shaped shadows stained her neck. She stared at herself in the cracked mirror and did what she had learned to do. She covered what she could. Foundation over the jaw, powder over the throat, a high-collared cream blouse buttoned to the top, hair pinned lower than usual. A scarf would have been too obvious, and Velma had become an expert at hiding inside ordinary choices. Ben was asleep on the couch when she left. One arm over his face, mouth slightly open, looking almost boyish in the grey morning light. The sight made her feel sick with a grief she did not want. She hated him. She feared him. She remembered loving him. Those feelings lived inside her, like broken glass in a drawer, hidden but never safe to touch. She locked the apartment door behind her and walked to the train with her bag held close against her side, every step sending a quiet ache through her ribs. By the time she reached the top floor of Caserta Global, her face had become a mask again. The receptionist looked up, saw nothing unusual, and looked back down. Two guards by the private elevator nodded at her. Carmine asked if the shipping binders were ready. Velma said yes. Rocco asked if Emilio had approved the revised port schedule. Velma said he would review it before noon. No one paused. No one looked longer than they had to. Good, she thought. Perfect. Emilio's door was half open when she arrived at her desk. She could hear his voice inside, low and smooth, speaking Italian into the phone. He never raised his voice. He did not need to. Emilio Caserta was not the kind of man who wasted rage on volume. He was tall, controlled, and beautifully dressed, in a way that made violence look expensive. His suits were dark and perfectly cut. His hair was black with the faintest silver near the temples. His eyes were the color of strong coffee left untouched too long, deep brown until the light hit them, then almost gold. Most people felt smaller when he looked at them. Velma had trained herself not to. She placed his morning files in order, checked the boardroom schedule, and swallowed 2 painkillers with cold coffee from her desk. The board meeting was set for 9. 3 capos, 2 legal advisors, Carmine, and Emilio. The topic was a delayed shipment at the Eastern Port, though Velma knew from the sealed folder in her drawer that the delay was not really about shipping. It was about a port official who had decided one bribe was not enough. At 9 sharp, Velma entered the boardroom with a silver tray of coffee cups balanced against one hip and a stack of folders tucked under her arm. The room smelled like leather, espresso, rain, and expensive cologne. Emilio sat at the head of the table, silent, as the men argued around him. His gaze was on the city beyond the window, but Velma knew he was listening to every word. She moved carefully around the table, setting cups in front of each man without spilling a drop. Her ribs burned, her jaw throbbed beneath the makeup. The collar of her blouse felt tight against her throat, but she kept her posture straight. Carmine thanked her under his breath. Rocco did not. One of the lawyers kept talking as if she were furniture. That was fine. Furniture did not get questions. She reached Emilio last. His coffee was already waiting, black, no sugar, placed precisely to his right. She leaned forward to set down the port file. The movement pulled the fabric at her neck, and the stiff collar rubbed hard against the bruise beneath her ear. The pain was small compared to last night, but it was sharp and sudden. Velma gasped before she could stop herself. It was barely a sound, a quick, broken breath. In another room, with other men, it might have vanished beneath the noise. But Emilio's boardroom had rules, and one of them was that nothing escaped Emilio Caserta. The conversation died. Velma froze with her hand still on the folder. Her heart began to pound so hard she felt it in her injured ribs. She lowered her eyes, hoping, stupidly, that if she did not move, the moment might pass. It did not. Emilio turned his head slowly. His gaze settled first on her hand, then her stiff shoulder, then the side of her face. He did not speak for a moment. That was worse than shouting. His silence moved through the room like cold water beneath a door. "Velma," he said softly. She straightened at once. "Yes, Mr. Caserta?" "Turn around." The words were quiet, but every man in the room seemed to stop breathing. Velma's fingers tightened around the empty tray. "I'm sorry." "Turn around and look at me." She should have obeyed. She always obeyed at work, because work had rules, and rules kept her safe. But for one terrible second, she could not make her body move. Her mind filled with Ben's voice. "Don't embarrass me. Don't make this dramatic. Don't tell anyone our business. Nobody will believe you anyway." "Velma," Emilio said again, and this time there was something under his voice that made her throat tighten. Not anger, not yet. Something sharper, a tension. She turned. His eyes moved over her face with terrifying precision, the slight swelling beneath the makeup. The powder gathered unevenly near her jaw, the way she held her left arm close to her ribs, the too high collar, the fear she had spent all morning burying beneath professional stillness. He saw all of it. He saw too much. "Come here," he said. The room remained silent as she stepped closer. Her heels sank softly into the carpet. She stopped beside his chair, looking at the polished table instead of his face. Emilio reached up, not touching her yet. His hand paused near the collar of her blouse. His fingers were long, steady, marked with faint scars along the knuckles. "May I?" Velma swallowed. Every instinct screamed No. Her body had learned that hands near her throat meant danger. But this was Emilio, and the whole room was watching, and her refusal felt impossible. She gave one small nod. He moved the collar aside with careful fingers. The bruise beneath was not something makeup could fully hide. It spread in dark shadows along the side of her neck, ugly and unmistakable, the clear shape of a grip that had pressed too hard and stayed too long. Somewhere at the far end of the table, a man cursed under his breath. Emilio did not blink. His face did not change in any large way, but the room changed around him. The air grew thinner. The men shifted in their chairs as if they had felt a storm arrive before the rain. "Who did this?" he asked. Velma's eyes burned. "No one." His gaze lifted to hers. The lie sat between them for less than a second before it died. "No one," Emilio repeated, very softly. She looked away. I fell. The silence that followed was almost gentle. That made it unbearable. "Clear the room," Emilio said. No one argued. Chairs scraped back. Folders closed. Coffee sat untouched. Carmine was the last to leave, his dark eyes flicking once toward Velma's bruised throat, before he stepped out and shut the doors behind him. The soft click sounded final. Velma stood alone with Emilio Caserta in a room built for secrets. The moment the door closed, the strength went out of her knees. She gripped the edge of the table to stay upright. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to interrupt the meeting. I thought I covered it. I can still finish the notes, and I'll reschedule the port call if you want. I know this is unprofessional." Emilio rose from his chair. Velma flinched. He stopped immediately. That tiny pause nearly broke her. He had noticed that too. "Sit down," he said, but not harshly. "I'm fine. You are not. I can work. I know you can work." His voice remained low. "That is not what I asked." Velma sank into the nearest chair because standing suddenly felt too hard. Emilio crossed to the sideboard, poured water into a glass, and set it in front of her. Then he took the chair beside her instead of returning to the head of the table. It was a small choice, but somehow it felt enormous. Emilio Caserta did not sit beside people. People sat beneath him, across from him, in front of him, waiting to be judged. He waited until she drank. "Tell me his name," he said. Her fingers tightened around the glass. "It's personal." "Yes. It has nothing to do with work." "It does now." Velma let out a shaky breath. "Mr. Caserta, please. I appreciate your concern, but this is complicated." His expression hardened, though his voice stayed soft. "Complicated is a shipment held in customs. Complicated is a judge who wants more money than he is worth. Complicated is 3 families smiling at the same table, while all of them reach for knives underneath it. A man putting his hands around your throat is not complicated." The words landed too cleanly, too simply. Velma stared down at the water. Her reflection trembled in the glass. "You don't understand," she said. "No," Emilio replied, "but I understand fear. I understand ownership. I understand what it looks like when someone has been taught to apologize for bleeding." Her mouth pressed shut, but the tears came anyway. She hated them. She hated crying in front of him, hated the wet heat on her cheeks, hated the way her breath hitched like she was small. "I'm sorry," she said again, because the word lived inside her like a reflex. Emilio leaned forward, and this time his anger showed, not loud, not wild, but cold enough to frost the glass walls. "Do not apologize to me for what he did." Velma covered her mouth with one shaking hand. "For 3 years," Emilio continued, "you have kept my office alive. You know where every document is before anyone asks. You remember names my own men forget. You calm people who come in here ready to make mistakes. You have handled things no ordinary assistant would survive hearing. You are inside my walls, Velma. That means anyone who touches you has stepped into my territory." Her breath caught. "I'm not one of your men." No, he said, you are something far more useful. She looked at him then, startled through her tears. Emilio's gaze held hers. It was not soft, exactly. Emilio Caserta did not do soft in ways most people understood, but there was something steady there, something that felt almost more dangerous than kindness, because it did not ask permission to exist. His name, he said. Velma shook her head once. If I tell you, you'll kill him. I have not decided what I will do. That is not comforting. It was not meant to be. A fragile, broken laugh escaped her before she could stop it. It hurt her ribs, and she winced. Emilio saw that too. His eyes dropped to her side. He hurt your ribs. I think they're just bruised. You think. I didn't go to the hospital. Of course you didn't. His jaw tightened. Because hospitals ask questions. Velma closed her eyes. She was so tired. Tired of hiding. Tired of lying. Tired of measuring footsteps in her own apartment. Tired of making excuses for a man who made her afraid of doorways and phone calls and raised voices on television. When she opened her eyes again, Emilio was still watching her, patient, silent, inevitable. Ben Carter, she whispered. The name seemed too ordinary for the damage it had done. Ben Carter, a man with a cheap watch, a quick temper, and a smile that strangers trusted. A man who knew how to bruise without breaking anything obvious. A man who had made Velma believe escape was a luxury other women deserved. Emilio did not repeat the name. He simply took his phone from his pocket and made one call. Carmen, he said. Ben Carter. Find him. Velma straightened in panic. Emilio, wait. His eyes flicked to hers at the sound of his first name, but he did not interrupt the call. No death, he said after a moment, his gaze never leaving Velma. Not unless he makes it necessary. Relief and fear tangled so tightly in her chest she could barely breathe. Apartment, employment, accounts, vehicle, phone, lease, passwords, contacts, everything. Emilio listened for a moment. No, quietly. I want him alive enough to understand the lesson. Another pause. And Carmine, if he has anything of hers, recover it. If it smells like him, burn it. He ended the call. Velma stared at him. What did you just do? I removed a problem. You can't just erase someone's life. Emilio slipped the phone back into his jacket. Watch me. The answer should have frightened her. It did frighten her. But beneath the fear was something else, something shameful and warm and almost painful. For months, maybe longer, Velma had begged the world silently for one person to see that she was drowning. Now the most dangerous man she knew had seen one bruise and moved like the city itself had insulted him. You should have told someone, Emilio said. I tried once, Velma whispered. Not here. Before. A friend. She told me relationships are hard and maybe I should stop provoking him. Emilio's face went still. Velma gave him a weak look. Please don't ask for her name. For now, he said. She almost smiled. Almost. The private doctor arrived less than an hour later, brought through the service elevator with a black bag and the pale expression of a man who knew better than to ask questions. Emilio stayed in the office while Velma was examined in the small lounge beside his conference room. The doctor checked her jaw, her ribs, her throat, and the older yellow bruises along her upper arm that she had forgotten to hide. He spoke gently. He said nothing was broken, though 2 ribs were badly bruised. He gave her medication for pain, cream for the marks, instructions for rest, and a look so sad that Velma had to turn away. When she returned to Emilio's office, her blouse collar open and her makeup wiped partly away, he was standing by the window. The city looked bright behind him, innocent and busy, as if people were not being ruined and saved inside towers every day. You are not going back to your apartment, he said. Velma stopped near the door. I have nowhere else to go. You do. No. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. I am grateful. I really am, but I don't want to be hidden somewhere like a package. Emilio turned. You are injured. I know. You are afraid. I know that too. And still arguing. She looked down, embarrassed. Apparently, for the first time that day, something almost like amusement touched his mouth. It vanished quickly, but she saw it. There is a penthouse under one of my holding companies, private elevator, full security. You will stay there while this settles. While what settles? Your life. The words chilled her. That sounds less like protection and more like ownership. Emilio walked toward her, slow enough that she could step back if she wanted. She did not. Ben owned you by making you small, he said. I have no interest in making you small. But you do have interest in deciding where I sleep. Yes. At least you're honest. I find it saves time. She looked up at him, searching his face for cruelty, and finding something more complicated. Control. Yes. Power. Absolutely. A calm certainty that made ordinary men seem unfinished. But not the sour, grasping control Ben had used. Emilio was not trying to convince her she was helpless. He was standing in front of her, like helplessness was an insult he refused to allow. I need my things, she said quietly. They are already being collected. My personal documents? Recovered. My bank account? Secured. Her stomach dropped. You accessed my bank account? Carmine did. That is not better. Ben had access to it, Emilio said. He will not again. Velma's anger faltered. Ben did have access. He knew the password, because he had made her give it to him during one of his soft apologies, when saying no had felt like lighting a match in a room full of gas. Emilio watched the realization pass over her face. By tonight, the money he took from you will be returned, with interest. From where? From him. Velma sat down slowly in the chair across from his desk. The room seemed to tilt. Freedom had always looked like something slow and difficult in her mind. Secret savings, a new lease, a burner phone, a bag packed carefully over weeks. Court paperwork maybe, police reports maybe, endless proof, endless danger. But Emilio Caserta had taken her impossible future and rearranged it in less than a morning. It should have felt like salvation. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a very beautiful cliff. When evening came, Emilio himself rode with her to the penthouse. He did not touch her in the elevator. He did not crowd her in the car. He sat beside her in silence while the city darkened beyond the tinted windows, his men following in 2 vehicles behind them. Velma watched rain gather on the glass and tried to understand the strange new shape of her life. The penthouse was above a quiet street lined with old stone buildings and expensive restaurants with low golden lights. Inside, it was warm and enormous, with pale wood floors, soft gray furniture, wide windows, and a bedroom larger than her entire apartment. Fresh clothes hung in the closet, simple and elegant in her size. The refrigerator was stocked. A medical kit sat on the bathroom counter. Her own worn leather planner lay on the desk beside her recovered passport and birth certificate. On the nightstand was her phone, but when she picked it up, Ben's number was gone. So were his messages. So were the photos. Velma stared at the screen for a long time. Emilio stood near the doorway, hands in his pockets. You can call anyone you like, except him. She turned the phone over in her hand. And if I try? Don't. A soft sense of fear moved through her. Not the old fear. Not exactly. This one had silk walls and marble floors, and a lock on the door that kept danger out, while quietly reminding her she was inside. You know that sounds controlling. Yes. Do you care? Yes. She looked at him, surprised. His voice lowered. I care that you know the difference. I care that you question it. Keep questioning it, Velma. It may save you from me one day. The honesty of that stole whatever answer she might have given. He stepped back into the hall. Rest. The doctor will return in the morning. Your salary has been doubled. Your position remains yours. No one has been told anything, except that you are under my protection. Under your protection, she repeated. Yes. And what does that mean? Emilio looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the warm light of the penthouse. It means the city learned your name today. Then he left, and the door closed softly behind him. Velma stood alone in the quiet luxury, her ribs aching, her jaw bruised, her old life erased so completely that it felt less like escape and more like waking inside someone else's dream. She walked to the window and looked down at the city, at the endless lines of traffic and light, at all those people moving through the night unaware of the invisible systems beneath them. Money, fear, loyalty, violence, protection. She had spent 3 years filing those systems into folders and calendars, pretending she was only near the darkness, never part of it. Her phone buzzed in her hand. No caller name appeared, only a blocked number. Velma's blood went cold. For one heartbeat, she could not move. Then she answered. At first, there was only breathing, rough, angry, familiar. Ben's voice came through the line, thin and shaking with rage. You think he can save you from me? Velma's bruised fingers tightened around the phone. Outside, far below, a black car slowed at the curb and stayed there. And for the first time in her life, Velma did not whisper. He already did, she said. Then the line went dead. The call ended so suddenly that the silence felt louder than Ben's voice. Velma stood by the window with the phone still pressed to her ear, staring down at the black car parked beneath the glow of the street lamp. For a few seconds, her body forgot how to breathe. The old fear rose fast and familiar, crawling up from her stomach into her throat, telling her to lock the doors, lower the lights, apologize to the empty room, and make herself small enough that no one would think to hurt her. But the penthouse was not her old apartment. The walls were thick, the windows were high. The locks belonged to men who did not hope for safety, but built it with steel, money, and threats whispered into the right ears. Velma lowered the phone slowly and looked at her reflection in the glass. Her jaw was bruised. Her neck was marked. Her hair was loose around her shoulders now, softer than she usually allowed it to be. She looked frightened, yes, but she also looked awake. The black car stayed there for another moment, dark and patient. Then the driver's door opened. A man stepped out. It was not Ben. He was taller, broader, wearing a dark coat and a cap pulled low over his face. Velma's heartbeat kicked hard against her ribs. He looked up toward the building as if he knew exactly which window was hers. Then a second car turned the corner with its headlights off, rolling silently along the curb behind him. 2 men stepped out before it had fully stopped. Emilio's men. Velma knew them by the way they moved, calm and certain, like the street belonged to them, because no one had been brave enough to prove otherwise. The man by the black car tried to run, but he barely made it 3 steps. One of Emilio's guards caught him by the back of his coat and folded him against the hood without raising his voice. Velma should have looked away. Instead, she watched. She watched as the man's cap was removed, as his pockets were emptied, as his phone was taken and held up beneath the street lamp. He was not Ben, but Ben had sent him. That truth settled coldly inside her. Ben Carter had lost his apartment, his money, his lease, his easy access to her life, and still he had found a way to reach toward her. The fear inside Velma changed shape. It was no longer a closed fist around her throat. It became something quieter and more focused, a question. How many times had she mistaken survival for surrender? How many times had she told herself staying quiet was the same as staying alive? Her phone buzzed again. This time Emilio's name appeared on the screen. She answered without thinking. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was controlled, but something sharp lived beneath it. "No," Velma said. Her own voice surprised her. It was thin, but it did not break. "He called me." "I know." Of course he knew. Somehow that did not anger her tonight. It steadied her. "He sent someone to watch the building," she said. "He sent a frightened fool who owed him money. My men have him." Velma turned from the window and pressed her back against the glass. The city glowed behind her. "Ben said you couldn't save me from him." There was a pause on the line. When Emilio spoke again, his voice was softer. "Ben has built his whole life on making weak people believe he is strong. He does not understand what strength is." "And what is it?" "Sometimes it is knowing when not to kill a man because the woman he hurt asked you not to." Velma closed her eyes. Her ribs ached with every breath, but the pain no longer felt endless. "I meant what I said. I know. I don't want him dead. I know that too. But I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering when he'll find a new way back in. He will not." She opened her eyes. "You sound very sure." "I am. That scares me." "It should." His answer came without hesitation. "Power should scare you, Velma. Mine especially. But I gave you my word. I will not become another man you obey because you are afraid of what happens if you don't." She swallowed against the ache in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not gently, exactly. Emilio did not know how to wrap truth in soft cloth. He handed it over bare and sharp, as if trusting her to hold it without bleeding. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you sleep." "I don't think I can." "Then lie down and pretend. Your body will understand before your mind does." It was such a strange thing to say that she almost smiled. "And tomorrow?" she asked. "Tomorrow, you stay in the penthouse and let the doctor examine you again." Velma looked around at the beautiful room, at the fresh clothes in the closet, the untouched bed, the clean quiet that did not know what to do with her panic. "No." The silence on the line shifted. "No," Emilio repeated. "No," she said again, stronger this time. "I'm going to work. You are injured. I am still employed. You are under medical orders to rest. I have spent years resting in fear." It did not help. This time the pause lasted longer. "Velma," Emilio said carefully, "do not mistake walking into danger for taking back control. I'm not. I'm walking into my office." She looked down at her bare feet on the pale wood floor. "If I stay hidden, every man in that building will know Ben changed my life. If I go back, they'll know he didn't." For a while, Emilio said nothing. Velma could almost picture him somewhere in the dark, phone to his ear, jaw tight, surrounded by men waiting for orders. Finally, he exhaled. "A car will be downstairs at 7:30. She let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet. Carmine will ride with you. 2 guards will stay near your desk. The doctor will check you at noon. If you become dizzy, if you feel faint, if your pain gets worse, you leave." That sounds like a lot of conditions. It is. Fine. "And Velma?" "Yes? If anyone makes you feel ashamed of what happened, you tell me." Her fingers tightened around the phone. "What will you do?" His answer was quiet enough to make her skin prickle. "I will remind them how fragile comfort is." The next morning arrived pale and rainy, washing the city in soft grey light. Velma dressed slowly in a navy blouse that did not hide her throat completely. The bruises were still there, ugly and visible at the edges, but she did not cover them with heavy makeup. Not all the way. Her hands shook when she fastened her earrings. They shook when she brushed her hair back. They shook when she stepped into the private elevator and found Carmine waiting downstairs beside a black sedan. But she still went. The office changed the moment she entered. No one said anything at first. That was how she knew they all knew. The receptionist looked down too quickly. One of the junior analysts stood so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. 2 of Emilio's men, Men who had once joked near her desk as if she were part of the furniture, went silent with their coffee cups halfway to their mouths. The air was thick with knowledge, not pity exactly. Not only pity, something closer to caution. Velma Sykes had walked into work bruised, and Emilio Caserta had torn a man's world apart before lunch. Now every glance at her carried the careful weight of men measuring the distance between their own mouths and their own survival. Velma placed her bag beside her desk and turned on her computer. Carmine stood nearby, pretending not to hover. "You don't have to guard me like I'm a museum painting," she said without looking up. Carmine cleared his throat. "Boss said 10 feet. Is that 10 feet from me, or 10 feet from anyone who might annoy me?" His mouth twitched. "Both, probably." That almost made her laugh. Almost. Emilio's office door opened at 8 sharp. He stepped out wearing a charcoal suit and an expression that made the whole floor grow colder. His eyes went directly to Velma. He took in her blouse, her pale face, the careful way she sat, the bruise she had not fully hidden. For one brief second, his control slipped, and she saw the fury beneath it. Then it was gone. "You were told to rest," he said. Velma rose with his coffee in hand. "You were told I was coming in." "By you." "Yes." "That is not the same thing." She walked toward him, aware of every eye pretending not to watch. "Your 9 o'clock call with the shipping brokers has been moved to 9:30 because the customs packet from Newark had 3 missing signatures. I already corrected it. The legal team is waiting on your approval for the port settlement language. Rocco wants 5 minutes before the finance review, though I recommend you give him 3 because he's nervous and will talk too much if encouraged." Emilio stared at her. She held out the coffee. "Also, you have not eaten breakfast." Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe? Irritation? Something warmer that he buried quickly. He took the coffee from her hand. "You are very stubborn," he said. "I prefer precise." "You would." Velma lowered her voice. "I am grateful for what you did, but I am not charity. I am not a broken thing you get to put somewhere safe and admire for surviving. I earned this desk. I earned the keys, the schedules, the files, the trust. If you protect me, protect the woman who works here, not the woman you think needs to be kept." For a moment, the entire floor seemed to hold its breath. Emilio leaned closer, not enough to frighten her, just enough that his voice belonged only to her. "My protection is not pity, Velma. Pity is useless. You are not useful because you are wounded. You are useful because you are exact, because you remember everything, because men twice your size become careless around you, and you never do. I did not double your salary because I felt sorry for you. I doubled it because I have underpaid one of the most valuable people in this building." The words struck deeper than praise. Velma looked at him and felt some hidden part of herself stand up straighter. "Then let me work," she said. Emilio's mouth curved, barely. Work. By noon, the office had found a new rhythm around her, quieter, more careful. Men brought documents to her desk with both hands. No one asked about her neck. No one asked about Ben. And Velma, who had expected to feel exposed, began to feel something else, visible. The difference was delicate but enormous. Exposure was what Ben had done to her, stripping her privacy, her choices, her confidence, piece by piece. Visibility was this, sitting at her desk with her bruises seen and her value untouched. That afternoon, Emilio took her with him to the port. He did not ask whether she wanted to come. He simply appeared beside her desk with his coat on and said, "Bring the Eastern shipment file." Velma blinked. "Me? You prepared the settlement language." "Yes, but I usually don't attend port meetings." "You do today." The port was a world of metal, fog, diesel, and cold water. Cranes moved slowly against the gray sky like giant insects. Containers were stacked in long rows. painted red, blue, and dull green, each one holding secrets Velma had only ever seen as numbers in a spreadsheet. Emilio walked beside her with Carmine and 2 guards behind them. He did not slow his pace, but he seemed aware of every careful breath she took. The bruised ribs made the damp air feel heavier. The port official waiting near Warehouse 12 was a narrow man with a neat mustache and nervous hands. His name was Martin Keene. Velma knew his file: married, 2 children in private school, gambling debts, recently paid $20,000 to delay a safety inspection for a company that did not technically exist. He had already accepted Emilio's money to clear 6 containers by morning. Now the containers were still sealed, and Martin Keene had decided fear could be turned into profit twice. "I'm sorry, Mr. Caserta," Keene said, smiling too much. "New compliance concerns came up overnight. These things happen. I may need additional support to move this along." Emilio looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Additional support. Keene swallowed. Paperwork support. Velma stood behind Emilio with the file against her chest. She could hear the water hitting the dock pilings below. She could smell salt, rust, and rain. "How much?" Emilio asked. Keene's smile grew thin. "Another 50. $50,000, Emilio said softly. "For paperwork I already purchased." Keene spread his hands. "The city is expensive." Emilio nodded once, almost thoughtfully. Then he stepped forward and struck him. It happened so fast Velma barely saw the movement. One moment Keene was smiling. The next, he was against the side of a container, gasping, his face pale with shock. Emilio did not shout. He did not lose control. He simply moved closer and spoke in a low voice Velma could not fully hear. Keene began nodding before Emilio had finished. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone and made the call to release the shipment. Velma stood frozen. She had known what Emilio was. Everyone knew, in the way people knew storms were dangerous without standing in the center of one. But seeing it up close was different. The calm, the certainty, the way violence appeared and vanished like a tool returned to a drawer. It frightened her. It should have made her run. Instead, her eyes dropped to the ground. There was blood on the wet concrete near Keene's shoe. Not much, but enough. Enough to be photographed. Enough to become evidence. Enough to be found by the wrong maintenance worker with the wrong brother-in-law in law enforcement. "Do you have bleach in the warehouse?" Velma asked. Carmine looked at her as if she had spoken a forgotten language. "What?" "Bleach," she said, still staring at the blood. "Or industrial cleaner, something with a strong enough smell to explain the discoloration." Emilio turned slowly. Velma looked at Carmine. "And move him away from the container. If anyone checks the cameras later, they'll look at the angle from the east gate first. He needs to stand behind the forklift when he makes the second call, not in the open. His face is too obvious right now." Keene stared at her, one hand over his mouth. Velma looked at him. "You should say you slipped near the loading ramp. There's water everywhere. It's believable." No one moved for a second. Then Emilio began to smile. It was not a kind smile. It was not even a romantic one. It was the look of a man watching a locked door open inside a person he thought he already understood. "You are terrifying," he said. Velma's cheeks warmed, but she kept her voice even. "I manage logistics." "Yes," Emilio murmured. "You do." After that, everything changed faster than Velma could name. Emilio moved her desk inside his office 3 days later. He said it was for security, but the new desk faced the city beside his bookshelves, not the door like a guard station. He gave her access to accounts she had only seen referenced in partial documents. Real ledgers, hidden ledgers, shell companies folded inside other shell companies like paper birds. Money moving through ports, restaurants, construction firms, art storage facilities, and charities with names so gentle they almost sounded holy. Velma learned the shape of Emilio's empire from the inside, and the more she saw, the less she felt like a secretary standing at the edge of a dangerous room. She found errors his accountants had missed, not large ones at first, a recurring payment coded under the wrong vendor, a port fee that had doubled without explanation, a charity account being used too often by Rocco's crew. When she pointed them out, Emilio listened. When she corrected them, money stopped leaking. When a legal advisor tried to question why she had access to certain files, Emilio looked at him for 5 silent seconds, and the man apologized to Velma before leaving the room. Her body healed in slow pieces. The bruise on her jaw faded from purple to yellow to nothing. Her ribs stopped screaming when she reached for files. The marks on her neck disappeared last. Every morning, she looked in the mirror and saw less of Ben's hand and more of her own face returning. But she was not the same woman who had hidden beneath a high collar. Something in her had shifted. She no longer moved through the office hoping not to disturb the air. She entered rooms knowing the air would move around her. Ben vanished from the city, but not from her mind. Emilio kept his word. Ben was not dead. That was all Velma asked to know. His accounts were empty, his name removed from the lease, his job gone after certain files appeared in certain inboxes. He had been placed on a bus with one warning and enough fear to make it feel heavier than chains. Sometimes Velma woke in the penthouse expecting to hear his key in the lock. Sometimes she still flinched when a man laughed too loudly. Healing did not arrive like a sunrise. It came like a cautious animal, showing itself only when the room stayed quiet long enough. Emilio never asked her to explain those moments. He noticed them, because he noticed everything, but he did not force her open. If her hands shook, he poured water. If she went silent, he made the room quiet. If she challenged him, he answered like her questions mattered. That frightened her almost as much as his power. Ben had demanded trust while making trust impossible. Emilio never demanded it. He simply stood close enough to catch danger and far enough to let her choose where to place her feet. 2 weeks after the night of the phone call, a storm rolled over the city so hard the windows trembled. Emilio had gone to the shipyards after a late report from warehouse security. Most of his senior men went with him, leaving the executive floor quiet except for Velma, Carmine, and 2 guards near the private elevator. Velma sat at Emilio's desk, reviewing a set of transfers connected to the Eastern containers. Her own desk was nearby, but Emilio's monitor had the better ledger access, and she had stopped asking permission for things she already knew how to fix. Rain streaked down the glass walls. Thunder rolled low over the river. The office lights flickered once, then steadied. Carmine looked up from the couch near the door. Generator will catch if it goes. Velma nodded, only half listening. Something in the ledger bothered her. A vendor name repeated twice, but with a tiny spacing difference. It was the kind of mistake people made when they wanted a machine to see 2 things and a human to see 1. She leaned closer, her fingers moving over the keyboard. Carmine, yeah? Did Emilio authorize any access to the old freight elevator today? No. Are you sure? Carmine stood. The lights went out. For 1 second, the entire floor vanished into black. Then the emergency lights came on, bathing the office in dim red. Somewhere beyond the reception area, metal groaned. The freight elevator. Velma heard it before she saw anything. A hard mechanical thud. Then another. Then voices, low and rushed. Carmine moved fast. Panic room. Now. Velma's heart slammed against her ribs. The ledgers. I said now. She was already at the computer, locking the main drive. If they came through the freight elevator, they know Emilio's gone. Velma, they're here for the accounts. The first gunshot cracked through the outer office. Glass shattered, one of the guards shouted. Carmine grabbed Velma by the arm and pulled her down behind Emilio's desk as another shot tore through the doorframe. The sound was deafening, brutal, too real. Velma's body wanted to fold into itself, but her mind had already narrowed into tasks. Lock the drive. Encrypt the backup. Kill remote access. Protect the ledger. Protect the money. Protect the empire. Carmine fired twice toward the outer room, then cursed as a shot caught him high in the shoulder and knocked him back against the wall. Velma crawled to him, but he waved her away with his good hand. "Panic room," he growled. "That's an order. You're not my boss." Bad time to remember that. Another shot punched through the office door. Wood splintered above her head. Velma ducked, breathing hard. The panic room was behind the bookcase. She knew the code. She could get inside and survive. But Carmine was bleeding on the carpet, and the ledgers were still finishing encryption, and if the attackers got into the vault before Emilio returned, they could pull enough information to gut the organization from the inside. Velma looked at Emilio's desk. She remembered the hidden compartment because she remembered everything. Third drawer, false back, thumb latch under the brass rail. Her hands moved before fear could argue. She crawled behind the desk, opened the drawer, found the latch, and pulled. A small black pistol rested inside beside 2 magazines and a folded stack of emergency cash. She had never fired a gun. The fact arrived calmly, almost politely. She picked it up anyway. It was heavier than she expected. Cold in her hand, Carmine saw it and went pale. "Velma, no. They're coming through the door," she said. "You don't know how to use that. I understand the basic idea. That is not comforting." The office door burst open. A man in a black rain jacket stepped through with his weapon raised toward Carmine. Velma did not think of Ben. She did not think of Emilio. She did not think of whether her hands were shaking. She thought only of the angle, the distance, the way the man's attention had gone to the wounded person instead of the quiet woman behind the desk. She fired. The shot kicked hard enough to sting her wrist. The man screamed and dropped, clutching his leg. Velma fired again at the wall beside the second attacker, close enough to make him dive back into the hallway. Her ears rang. Her mouth tasted like metal. "Stay back," she called, and her voice sounded nothing like the woman who used to apologize for taking up space. The attackers shouted to each other. One of them said her name. That chilled her more than the gunfire. They knew who she was. They had come not only for ledgers, but for the woman who could open them. Velma glanced at the computer. 87% encrypted. Too slow. She pulled herself into Emilio's chair, keeping the gun pointed toward the doorway with one trembling hand while typing with the other. She opened the emergency burn protocol. It was meant to wipe the visible system, not destroy the true backups. She changed the screen display, routing a false countdown onto the main monitor where anyone entering could see it. Then she raised her voice. "The ledgers are rigged to burn. One more step and every account goes dark." Silence from the hallway. Rain hammered the windows. One attacker laughed. "You're bluffing." Velma looked at the countdown, then at Carmine bleeding against the wall, then at the doorway where shadows moved. "Maybe," she said, "but you came here because someone told you I was the one who knows the system. So ask yourself if I sound like a woman guessing." No one answered. Distant sirens began to rise below, faint at first, then growing. The attackers hesitated. That was all she needed. Carmine, pale and furious, lifted his weapon with his good arm and fired into the hallway. The men retreated, dragging their wounded with them. The freight elevator doors groaned again. Boots pounded. Then they were gone. Velma did not move until the encryption finished. Only then did the gun lower in her hand. She crawled to Carmine and pressed her scarf against his wound. "Hold this tight." He winced. "You shot him." "Yes. You said you understood the basic idea." "I did. You are never telling the boss I said you couldn't." Despite everything, Velma laughed. "It came out shaky and wild, but it was real. You were interrupting my workflow." By the time Emilio arrived, The storm had turned the sky almost black. He came through the ruined outer office soaked with rain, his coat open, his face stripped of every polite mask he owned. Men followed behind him, but Velma barely saw them. She was sitting in his chair, Carmine alive on the couch with a guard pressing a proper bandage to his shoulder. The system restored on 3 monitors, the false burn screen still glowing red in the background. Emilio stopped in the doorway. His eyes found the blood first, then Carmine, then the broken glass, then Velma. For one terrible second, he looked almost human. "Velma," he said. She stood too fast and had to grip the desk. "The accounts are secure. Eastern shipment funds are untouched. The vendor duplicate was a breach marker, not a payment error. I isolated the false route and locked the backup ledgers. Carmine needs a hospital, but the bleeding slowed. Also, there is a bullet hole in your wall, and I am not taking responsibility for the repair estimate." Emilio stared at her, as if she had just spoken to him from the edge of a grave. Then he crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. It was not smooth. It was not careful. It was the first uncontrolled thing she had ever seen him do. His hand cradled the back of her head, his other arm locked around her waist, holding her so firmly she could feel the hard beat of his heart beneath his wet shirt. "I don't care about the accounts," he said against her hair. "Yes, you do," she whispered. "No." "Yes, Emilio, you do. That's why I saved them." He pulled back just enough to look at her. Rain clung to his lashes. His eyes were fierce and dark and full of something that made her chest ache. "I cared that you might be dead." Velma's throat tightened. "I was scared." "I know, but I stayed." His hand moved to her face, thumb brushing gently near the place where the bruise had once been. "Yes," he said, "you stayed." She looked at him, at the man who could ruin lives with a phone call and still ask permission before touching a wound. "I am not helpless. No. I am not something you saved. No. I saved myself too." Emilio's gaze softened in that dangerous, private way that belonged only to her now. "Yes, Velma, you did." Then he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss, but it was not a theft. It was a promise meeting a choice. His mouth was warm, rain-cold at the edges, and Velma rose into him with a hunger that startled her. She had been kissed before by a man who used love like a leash. This was different. Emilio did not make her feel trapped in her body. He made her feel present in it, alive in it, powerful in it. She gripped the front of his wet shirt and kissed him back, like the storm had moved inside her, and finally found somewhere to go. Carmine groaned from the couch. "I hate to interrupt whatever this is, but I am still bleeding." Velma broke the kiss with a breathless sound that might have been a laugh. Emilio did not look away from her. "Take him to the doctor," he ordered. Carmine muttered, "Gladly." After that night, no one in the organization called Velma just the secretary again. Not where Emilio could hear it, not where Carmine could hear it. Eventually, not anywhere. The attack became a story told in careful voices the night a rival crew broke into Caserta Global during a storm and left with nothing but wounds, fear, and the knowledge that Emilio's quiet woman could hold the empire together with one hand while aiming a gun with the other. Ben Carter became a smaller ghost every day. There were still mornings when Velma woke with fear in her mouth. There were still moments when sudden anger made her body brace for impact. But those moments no longer owned her. Emilio arranged for her to learn how to shoot properly, and she went every Thursday afternoon with Carmine, who complained loudly about her aim until she started hitting the center of the target. She moved into the master suite at the penthouse after a month, not because Emilio ordered it, but because he asked once, very quietly, and accepted the 3 days she took to answer. At work, her new title was Director of Internal Operations, though everyone knew titles were only decorations for what she had become. Velma controlled access to Emilio's calendar, his ledgers, his port documents, his private files, and eventually the flow of information between his crews. She knew which men were loyal, which men were greedy, and which men smiled too quickly. She reorganized the empire with the same careful precision she once used to prepare coffee, and under her hands the business became quieter, cleaner, harder to touch. One evening, months later, Velma stood beside Emilio in his office as the city turned gold beneath the setting sun. The old fear was not gone completely, but it had become distant, like thunder heard from far away. She wore a dark green dress that fit her exactly, her hair pinned back with a gold clip Emilio had given her, and she had pretended not to love. On his desk lay 3 signed agreements, 2 corrected ledgers, and 1 report confirming that the rival crew responsible for the Storm Night attack had lost every port contact they had. Emilio came to stand behind her, not touching until she leaned back first. "The city is calm," he said. "For now," Velma replied. His mouth brushed near her temple. "You sound disappointed." "I sound realistic." "You sound like me." She smiled at the skyline. "No, I sound like myself." His arms settled around her waist, warm and certain. "Good." Velma looked down at the streets far below, remembering the woman who had once walked into this building with bruises hidden under a high collar, believing invisibility was the safest thing she could hope for. That woman had not been weak. Velma understood that now. She had been surviving with the tools she had: silence, routine, precision, patience. But survival was not the end of her story. It was only the place where the story had waited, quiet and breathing, until she was ready to open the door. Emilio turned her gently to face him. "Are you happy?" he asked. The question surprised her because it was so simple, so ordinary. In his world, men asked about loyalty, money, risk, revenge. Happiness seemed too soft a word to survive here. But Velma thought about the penthouse, the office, Carmine's grumbling, the ledgers under her control, the city that knew her name now, the man in front of her, dangerous and flawed, and hers only because she chose him every day, not because fear had left her no other door. "Yes," she said, "but not because you saved me." Emilio's eyes held hers. "No? No." She lifted her hand and straightened his tie, smiling when his gaze dropped to her fingers. "Because you saw me, and then you made room for me to become impossible to ignore." His expression shifted, that quiet devotion cutting through the darkness in him like light beneath a closed door. "You were always impossible to ignore." Velma laughed softly. "That is not true. It is to me." Outside, the city lights began to flicker on, one by one, bright against the deepening blue. Inside the office, Emilio kissed her hand, then her wrist, then the place on her throat, where there were no bruises anymore. Velma closed her eyes, not to disappear, but to feel the moment fully. She had entered Emilio Caserta's world as the quiet woman behind the desk, the one who made coffee, filed secrets, and lowered her eyes when dangerous men passed. She had been hurt, hunted, protected, tested, and remade by choices that were finally her own. By the time night settled over the city, Velma Sykes was no longer hiding from anyone. She stood beside Emilio as his partner, his strategist, his calm in the storm, and the one person in the empire who could make even monsters wait. The world had once taught her to fear the space she took up. Now the whole underworld shifted to make room for her. And somewhere beneath the polished glass, the locked ledgers, the quiet orders, and the soft glow of the city, a new truth began to spread from mouth to mouth, like a warning. Emilio Caserta ruled the empire, but Velma Sykes knew where every secret was buried. And queens, unlike kings, rarely needed to raise their voices to be obeyed.